Chapter 71, Dungeon Upgrade. 2. I love you, valuable customer. What can I help you with? His eyes were fixed on the only figure that was standing in the white room. As usual, the red-haired Citri was beautiful. While sitting on a white antique chair, Citri greeted Yong-ho and motioned him to sit. Within moments, a chair appeared behind Yong-ho. Yong-ho was used to it now, so he calmly sat in front of Citri. Citri spoke first as usual. You've become stronger. Unlike his horns, the change wasn't something that could be seen with the bare eyes. Instead of going into details, Yong-ho just smiled, and Citri responded by slightly opening her eyes. There was a reason behind Yong-ho's smile. Yong-ho became stronger. After the fight with Forest, he consumed the distortion, a landworm, and Jungsaros spirit. Even though it was a short period, the change was so big that it was safe to say that he was a different person. It couldn't be compared to when he first met Citri, and that big change made Citri smile every time Citri fixed her posture. Her legs were no longer crossed, and even though she was wearing a long dress, Yong-ho instinctively looked at her legs. Citri giggled. It seems like you recently visited the pub. Did things go well with Ophelia? The details involved many different things. Yong-ho placed his elbow on the armrest. He touched his chin and looked at Citri. You already knew. He stated the obvious, and instead of denying it, she gracefully nodded her head. But that's all I know. What happened afterwards? I can only imagine it. Citri knew that the pub's female owner used to be Mammon's spirit in the past. Yong-ho recalled the time when Citri told him that he needed to find a different method of obtaining information. Is it safe to assume that she led me to meet Ophelia? Yong-ho shook his head. It wasn't because he didn't like the idea that Citri controlled him. Deciding to visit the pub and the timing was decided by Yong-ho. Citri remained calm. He wanted to erase the calm look that was on her face, but it was unnecessary. He stopped touching his chin and spoke. It was a great meeting. She's very talented. It's because her father was the most talented spirit among the spirits that served under Kaiwan. Red demons are known to be a faithful race. Even though she didn't mean much by it, there was a word that caught Yong-ho's attention. Instead of playing hard to get, Citri provided him with information. In the demon world, the red demons are a popular fighting race. Even though they're not as talented as dragons, suras, or archdemons, they grow very quickly. The red demons that have reached their limit are extremely strong. The dragons are the strongest in the demon world when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. Among them, ancient dragons are dragons that have completely developed, and the red demons are able to take them down. However, this only applies when they've grown. A red demon that hasn't grown is weaker than an orc. He couldn't help but think of Eligor's face when he heard the last part. Red demons are very talented in hand-to-hand combat. Even if they increase their mana, they rarely use it. They prefer to use that mana to strengthen their body. It's also very efficient. It's very rare for a red demon, like Ophelia, to be skilled in a psychological type magic. She probably worked very hard to learn it. She was very detailed, and Yong-ho naturally agreed with her. It's because both Eligor and Ophelia's bodies had better potential than their mana. The race that can even bring down an ancient dragon. Even though he didn't know much about the different races in the demon world, the word dragon was enough for him to imagine a strong creature in his head. He became curious. Citri continued talking without hesitation, an example of a red demon that reached their limits. In the dungeon shop that I'm a part of, one of the board of directors named Orobus is known to be the strongest. He's known as the Demon Prince in the demon world, and he possesses an enormous amount of physical strength. When it comes to strength alone, no one in the dungeon shop or the demon world is able to take him down. Words that excited Yong-ho kept on flowing out. Phi's board of directors. Enormous physical strength. Demon Prince. A place higher than the sky and lower than the ground. It felt like Yong-ho encountered a new type of power that wasn't a part of this world. He can become as strong as him. He could even become stronger than Orobus. The same applies to demon kings. Citri suddenly spoke. Her long eyelashes softly went down as she blinked her eyes. Demon kings also grow. A weak demon king may be similar to a goblin, but for the strongest demon king, a wave of a hand, they can burn the sky and dry out the sea. They can take down not only one, but many ancient dragons. They can take down an entire army without any issues. They'll end up cutting off their heads the moment they look at them. The familiar words excited Yong-ho. Yong-ho could feel that Sitri was talking while thinking of someone. There is a limit to a demon king's power, but it's possible to grow. A new wall will be waiting when the old wall is destroyed, but all you have to do is destroy the new wall. As long as the demon king is growing and has the will to grow, there's no limit. However, if they stop or lose that will, they'll be trapped within the limit they created for themselves and won't be able to grow anymore. Forus was the demon king of coldness. Was their power only limited to creating coldness? Was it a power that couldn't be developed further? Young Karos' nickname was the demon king of control. Through mind control, they could paralyze their opponent or force them to move a certain way. But if that's all their power did, then the nickname was a waste. It can definitely be developed further. It can become a stronger power. But both Forus and Jungshiros couldn't grow anymore. They became still. The power of evolution probably had its limits as well. He can only use the power on spirits that have been officially registered, so in some ways, that was the power's limit. There could also be a limit to the number of spirits he can use the power on, but that was just the current limit. Yong-ho closed his eyes longer than usual. He then opened them and looked at Sitri, who was looking at Yong-ho the entire time. It was definitely not an ordinary relationship. It was different from the relationship that a customer and a merchant had. Sitri wanted Yong-ho to grow. Even though she didn't guide him every step of the way, every time they met, she would throw out warnings and advice, and it helped him a lot. But why? Could it be because there was a really intimate relationship, and it wasn't simply because she was the guardian of the House of Mammon like Ophelia? In the past, out of the 12 spirits that ruled the demon world with Mammon, maybe she was one of Mammon's. No, that's not it. Like I've explained before, I'm just an important figure within the dungeon shop. So that's all you need to think about when you see me, Sitri spoke bluntly, as if she read Yong-ho's mind and finished it off with a smile. Yong-ho felt an invisible wall, and that's when he understood. From the beginning, Yong-ho told himself that he wouldn't completely trust Sitri. He didn't want to depend on her after thinking that maybe she could be a spirit of the House of Mammon. He didn't like it. The relationship they had now was more than enough. It looks like you brought a lot of items with you. I'm excited to see what kind of items you'll be purchasing this time. Sitri spoke like a merchant, and Yong-ho stated that that was the reason why he visited the virtual space. His meeting with Sitri wasn't as important. There's a lot of things I would like to purchase. I'll help you with that today. Sitri stood up from her seat, and despite the fact that there wasn't a bookshelf, she took out several large books. It was physically impossible, but this was the virtual space, and Sitri was a strong demon. Did you want to purchase another spirit? Or weapons? If not those, then items. The catalogs left Sitri's hand and were placed in front of Yong-ho. Instead of looking at the catalogs, Yong-ho looked at Sitri and answered, all 3 of them. I guess you'll be helping me with my performance. Even though I'm not the assigned merchant, I'm glad I put in a lot of effort. Are you still insisting on saying that you're not the assigned merchant? Because it's true. Yong-ho just smiled and let it go. He opened the catalogs. Impulse buying usually happens when one visits the market unexpectedly. Because of that, Yong-ho made a shopping plan before connecting to the virtual space. First, he needed to purchase 3 iron golems and skeleton workers. He wanted to use the iron golems during fights and for helping out around the dungeon. And for the skeleton workers, Yong-ho wanted to use them during fights. Yong-ho planned on creating an elite skeleton group where Skull would be the leader. Undeads are known to never get tired and can continuously do the same job as long as mana is provided. With that kind of perseverance, they'll be able to slowly build their development rate in the training ground. I did decide on evolving them into Death Knights. He wanted to create a group of knights. The best undead unit that included the Death Knights and a Lich. Of course, he still had a long way to go until that happened, but he knew it was worth the investment. With Skull, he'll start off with 6. As for the unit name, Skull unit should be fine, right? And for the rest of the skeletons, I think giving them call signs like Skull 2, Skull 3 should be fine. 3 iron golems and 5 skeleton workers. He decided to purchase those 8 spirits, and now he had to purchase various materials and necessities for the dungeon. He also needed to purchase materials for building the basic workshop. While listening to Citrus' advice, he purchased the things that were on his list. However, during the last moment, something unexpected happened. He had a strong desire to impulse buy. Rank 4 Spirit Catalog. Citri showed the cover with a smile, and Yong-ho realized again that Citri was a merchant. Only look, are you serious? You know what I mean? Would he be able to only look? Yong-ho extended out his hand and calculated his remaining budget. He opened to the first page as if he was being tempted by the devil. I love you, valuable customer. I really, really love you. The beautiful mystical elf had a soft waist, and by recalling Catalina's face and voluptuous body, he was able to endure it. He was able to prevent himself from purchasing the strong-looking troll warrior by recalling Eligor and Ophelia. For the skeleton knight, he didn't have the desire to purchase it since he had Skullbud. There was a spirit that tested Yong-ho's strong will to not purchase anything. Oh, awesome nightmare. It was a horse-shaped spirit that was a higher rank than the phantom steed. It was big and beautiful. Even though they were shaped like a horse, their body and appearance looked intense. Saying that they were the best horse wasn't an exaggeration. Their entire body was black, but their mane was white, and green flames rose out of their eyes. But I have Salami. Salami would soon evolve into an awesome fire dragon. That's why he was able to stop himself. No, it was impossible. What if Skull rode Salami after evolving into a skeleton knight, or Catalina could ride them? Battles happened outside of dungeons as well. Having transportation was important too. This is how much I think about you guys. After making up different excuses, Yong-ho expressed that he wanted to purchase the nightmare, and Citri replied by displaying the most beautiful smile. He was really done now. After making an impulse purchase, Yong-ho's time was almost up, and instead of saying goodbye, Citri started talking. If you continue becoming stronger, I recommend playing in a bigger pool. Bigger pool? Yong-ho asked without realizing it, and Citri nodded. She took out a flyer from between her breasts and handed it to Yong-ho. Dungeon shop auction house. Yong-ho lifted his head. Citri gently took a step back. The chaos will only become worse. If you survive the chaos and become even stronger, I'll make sure to serve you next time. Citri gracefully expressed her respect towards Yong-ho. She finished by displaying the same smile she always had. I love you, valuable customer. I look forward to our next meeting. The white world was now filled with darkness. Yong-ho naturally closed his eyes. Dungeon shop auction house. Why did Citri call that place a bigger pool? His thoughts disconnected. When Yong-ho opened his eyes, he saw Catalina and Eligor's faces. Chapter 72, Dungeon Upgrade 3. It became quite busy. After returning to the dungeon, Yong-ho visited the basic workshop and talked with Bugrim. Bugrim still couldn't talk, but he must have focused all of his energy on creating items because he created a lot of things while Yong-ho was away. He said with a decent brazier and anvil, he'll be able to create better items. Eligor explained on behalf of Bugrim. Yong-ho questioned with his looks on how they communicated, and Eligor explained that they used their bodies to communicate. Even though Bugrim couldn't speak, he could hear, and thanks to the evil spirit of the past, he was able to understand the other spirits. Bugrim was full of ambition. He wasn't the same as the Bugrim that was inside the prison cell. Yon, the goblin, probably became hopeful after hearing about the body recovering after one evolves. The spirits, including the goblins, didn't know that Yon had evolved, but since the dying Yon revived, that's all that mattered. Since Bugrim's skills had already been well developed, his development rate, wasn't increasing very much. After Yong-ho convinced himself that everything will pay off as long as he works hard, he headed towards the workshop. The Princess Ant and Spot were in the training ground swinging a stick. Spot was swinging with enthusiasm, but the Princess Ant was only swinging it because Spot told her. But thanks to that, her development rate was increasing. The farm was where the Princess Ant was staying, and thanks to Bugrim's hard work, it turned out really nice. And Spot's doghouse was located within the farm as well. After seeing the golems working on the gold mine, Yong-ho finished his dungeon visit and headed towards the spirit's dormitory. It was because of Jun. Jun was the only girl out of the goblin ranges, and the only one that wasn't a hobgoblin. By putting his focus on the ring, Yong-ho evolved Jun into a hobgoblin while everyone was watching. Hobgoblins had longer arms and legs than goblins, and their faces looked like a human's. Jun's messy appearance became a lot cleaner, and their curved back became straight, making her taller. Ordinary goblins had the body of a child, and hobgoblins had the body of a teenager. Among the House of Mammon's spirits, Spot was a veteran, so Yong-ho evolved Spot into a kobold runner. Spot's body didn't grow bigger like the goblins, but overall, he did look more agile. Does it really influence them? The same question he had when a handle appeared on Salamis back popped into his head again. Jun became more feminine, and Spot's aggressive-looking appearance became cute. It seemed like Yong-ho's thoughts influenced the spirit's outer appearance whenever they get promoted or evolved. I should think about good things. Catalina and Eligor were standing beside him, and as Yong-ho looked at them, he chuckled. Catalina and Eligor thought Yong-ho was satisfied with the evolution and laughed with him. The next day was pretty busy as well. Receiving the items that the dungeon shop sent was a lot of work, but handing over the valuable items was a lot of work as well. Eligor and the goblins cheered when they saw the 3 iron golems. The iron golems looked like they belonged on the battlefield rather than helping within the dungeon. Even though their movement was slower than a rock golem, they were stronger and was better at defense. Skull had various reactions when they saw the skeletons that were going to be working them. Skull was nervous at first and then satisfied. Yong-ho wasn't sure what was going on inside Skull's head, but after seeing Skull swing the hammer and command the skeletons, Yong-ho thought he looked like a general. Skull still had a long way to go. The skeletons were limping, and they all had the same blank expression that Skull had. Everyone admired the Nightmare when they entered. It seemed like the anesthetic magic hasn't worn off yet because Nightmare started blinking with a blank expression. Despite of that, they were overflowing with elegance. It was obvious as to what Nightmare's role was going to be. So Salami glanced over at Yong-ho. Nervously, Yong-ho thought Salami was cute and laughed out loud. Instead of making fun of them, he petted their head and spoke loudly. Nightmare's owner hasn't been decided yet, but one of the spirits in the House of Mammon will be its owner Rickham, and the orc's ears shot up like Catalina's. Catalina's ears also shot up and wagged her tail. Skull stroked Nightmare's mane, as if they were already the owner, and looked satisfied by what they saw. Even though the delivery courier left, they weren't done. Master, Lucia has returned looking more beautiful than ever. Tada! Lucia was done with upgrading the heart of the dungeon and spoke excitedly. In his head, Yong-ho imagined the blue-haired girl wearing a white dress and spinning in place. You're right. You've become prettier. Yong-ho touched the heart of the dungeon while agreeing with Lucia. Before, the heart of the dungeon was a smooth sphere, but after the upgrade, it had corners. Now, it looked more like a giant gem than a marble. Like I've informed you before, I'm able to add various facilities. And since I have stronger control of the dungeon, I'm able to control a larger area than before, and the number of spirits that can be registered into the dungeon has increased as well. Lucia displayed windows of light in front of Yong-ho. In the windows, it displayed the facilities that can be built, as well as a short description. Among them, Yong-ho pointed to the door of the space. Can we begin right away? Kaiwan did start building it. We can begin the process, but since we're lacking the materials, we won't be able to complete it. Materials. I can use my mana to charge the energy source that the door of the space needs. But in order to activate it, we need a magical equipment and knowledge. I recommend purchasing magic books related to the door of the space, either from the dungeon shop or outside. Is it similar to when a computer is missing a software? It's a similar situation. Lucia, who shared knowledge and memories with Yong-ho, replied right away. Her voice sounded like she had a bitter smile on her face. Purchasing a magic book from the dungeon shop. Now that I think about it, we do need a magician as well. He wasn't talking about a magician that participated in battles. In Korean RPGs, the magicians used elements like fire and thunder to attack the enemy, but Yong-ho already had substitutes for that role. Yong-ho and Salami could fulfill that role. A scholar rather than a fighter. A magician then can provide various support and tactics rather than casting strong, offensive spells. It'll even be better if they were overflowing with knowledge. While thinking about Catalina, he recalled the mystical elf that he gave up on and told himself that it was already in the past. He shook his head to get rid of the thought and focused on upgrading the dungeon. Then let's work on the door of the space later. and work on the training ground for the mid-ranking spirits. Let me know the materials and the amount of workers that are needed. I understand. I'll provide Eligor with the details. Like always, Catalina, who was standing beside Yong-ho, begged with her eyes to build a bathhouse, but it wasn't the most important facility. Catalina's tail dropped to the ground, and Yong-ho felt bad, but it couldn't be helped. But Yong-ho looked at the window of light that contained the door of the space, the things he needed to complete the door of the space. There was a lot of items were required in order to install it. It's amazing that Catalina and Eligor were able to open a temporary one. Not only did they use the remaining mana within the House of Mammon, they ended up using the magic scroll they had been saving. It's possible that Citri intervened. The past 2 days passed by really quickly. Yong-ho didn't waste any time during those 2 days. He evolved all the skeletons into skeleton soldiers, and by gathering Catalina, Skull, and the dungeon's main troops, he resumed exploring Kaiwan's inheritance. After exploring for 2 days, he discovered an official torture room and an enormous jail. The facility that Yong-ho wanted to discover was a magical library, but since Eligor looked really happy, he couldn't help but laugh with him. And on the 3rd day, instead of continuing the exploration, Yong-ho sat on the throne and looked at the loyal spirit. Ophelia, Enderlion's daughter, is here to greet the owner of the great House of Mammon. Even though they installed a long-distance communicator, she had items to give to him, so she decided to visit the House of Mammon. After she finished greeting Yong-ho, she looked over at Eligor and winked at him. Eligor replied with a cough. Catalina's ears started flapping as she tried to hold in her smile. As always, Ophelia's report was straightforward. The butler of the House of Abigail appointed Jungshiros's daughter as the new owner. She's already the general of the dungeon, and on top of that she has a feisty personality, so I don't think she'll surrender to the other owners. They're currently saving up the dungeon's main power. Foras dungeon was the shield, and even though the dungeon was no longer there, distance was the last barrier between the House of Mammon and the House of Abigail. It was probably okay to relax for now. The House of Abigail and the owners around that area currently believe that the House of Foras' new owner and Jungcheros gave it their all and killed each other. However, since there are a lot of suspicious parts, this rumor probably won't last long. Teres already an owner that's investigating the House of Foras remains. He just wanted to buy some time. This was what Yong-ho expected. Ophelia took a deep breath. It was as if the thing she was about to talk about was the most important. Ophelia spoke with a serious expression. Embryo started advancing south again. Vitaline was one of the owner that joined the Union, and after the Union fell, they ran away. But Embryo beat them to death and then took their dungeon. It's still pretty far away from the House of Mammon, but if they continued moving at this pace, they'll be here within 3 to 4 months at the earliest and 6 months at the latest. In a game, Embryo could be considered as the empty southern region's final boss, an enemy he was eventually going to have to face. If Embryo continued moving south, then Yong-ho couldn't let his guard down. And this may apply later on in the future. But it seems like the conflict between the King of Pride and the King of Envy has become more intense. There are rumors within the demon world that there may be an all-out war. It was a big deal when 2 kings out of the 6 kings clashed with each other. But, as Ophelia stated, they were far away, and since Yong-ho had to deal with Embryo first, that's all he focused on. Ophelia knew that as well. Ophelia didn't mention the conflict between the 2 kings just to deliver the news to Yong-ho. If an all-out war does occur, then there's a good chance that the other kings won't be able to focus on empty southern region. The empty southern region hasn't had a king for a long time, and there are rumors saying that it's because the other kings intervened. It was just a rumor, but the credibility was extremely high. The 6 kings didn't want a 7th king to appear. Even though the empty southern region was useless, it was big, and it was significant since Mammon, the king of greed, first rose to power in that region. Embryo wanted the empty southern region to become unified, so this was their chance. They might advance faster depending on when the 2 kings go to war. There was a time limit. Yong-ho decided that being aware was enough. Instead of torturing himself with useless thoughts, he decided to focus on becoming stronger. Ophelia, did you learn martial arts from your father? Ophelia replied immediately. Yes, I learned it from my father. It's a type of martial, sir. Ophelia stopped talking and called Yongho it, because Yongho had a strange expression. Military. It's not the military that I'm thinking of, right? I'm not sure what kind you're thinking about, but the martial arts is from the human world. Thanks to the distortions and the connection to the human world, knowledge of the human world has spread throughout the demon world. And the martial arts that I learned was one of them. My father improved it so that the red demons could learn it. Ophelia looked proud. It seemed like she really respected her father because whenever she greeted Yongho, she would always mention her father's name, martial arts. Yongho slightly turned his head to the side and saw Catalina and Eligor. Ophelia. Is there a type of martial arts that you can teach, Eligor? Eligor's eyes widened when he heard Yongho's question, and Ophelia smiled brightly. There is. My father worked on it as well. It's focused on having the advantage. That's perfect. I'll leave it to you. I understand I'll make sure to train him well. While Yongho and Ophelia were enjoying the conversation they were having, Eligor was feeling chaotic and couldn't snap out of it. Yongho spoke again, and, is there one that I can learn? Yongho was currently learning basic fighting skills from Catalina. However, since Catalina's fighting skills required the user to be agile, Yongho was only able to learn the basics. He thought about learning from Rickham at first, but since Rickham specialized in using large swords and axes, it wouldn't work out for Yongho since he used a lance. Catalina's tail and ears dropped when she heard Yongho's question. Ophelia saw Catalina's sad face, and also saw that Yongho was feeling bad, so she bit her lower lips. She contemplated for a bit, and then replied with respect, I can use the pub and search for one that's worthy enough. If not, I'll at least be able to obtain a book. But with all due respect, I don't really think it's necessary. The best teacher is standing right next to you. After she answered, Ophelia focused her attention on one place, and thanks to that, Yongho, Catalina, and Eligor were able to quickly understand who she was referring to. The Red Lotus Demon Lance. Aemon. Ophelia was looking at Aemon. Chapter 73. Dungeon Upgrade 4. There were various types of swords, all of which embody the name sword, because they share similar characteristics. So even if a weapon is called a sword, depending on the type, both the shape and use can be different. The same applied to lances. Lances have a lot of different types as well. Eastern and Western lances were different. There was also a big difference between a one-handed lance and a two-handed lance. It depended on whether the user wanted to stab the enemy or twirl it around so that the enemy couldn't get close. Was it going to be used in a battle between two groups, or in a battle where the user is alone? Some mithril lances are paired with axes, while there are some lances with specialized poles which utilizes the handle's flexibility. There was a huge difference. Because of that, every lance was different. The user needed to be sure of the type of lance and the type of skill they were going to learn. The Red Lotus Demon Lance, Aemon, wasn't an ordinary lance, and right now it looked more like an iron stick than a lance. Learning from a book or manual will have a negative impact on a beginner like Yongho. He needed a teacher that can fix his posture and call out his bad habits. Someone that understands Aemon's special skills. Someone that has been using the lance for a long time. Someone that's able to really grasp Yongho's movement. There was someone that had all of those requirements. Ophelia spoke in a pleasant tone. Sir Aemon. No, the Red Lotus Demon Lance. Aemon isn't an ordinary lance. Out of the 12 spirits that Mammon, the king of greed, commanded, it's known to be one of the most noble and powerful demons. Aemon is the spirit that stood by Mammon's side the longest. It experienced many wars and learned at many fighting skills during combat in that time. Ophelia, Endlian's daughter, swears on her father's name that out of all the lances, it's safe to say that Aemon is the strongest in the demon world. Learning how to use a lance from a lance, even though it's an answer that one would likely hear from the Chinese philosopher, Doga, Ophelia was very serious. Aemon had a will, which Ophelia thoroughly experienced at the pub. After she finished talking, Ophelia gulped it, because she remembered the time she encountered Aemon, an overpowering figure that ruled over the fiery world. Even though she just recalled that single moment, her back started to sweat. The cold sweat didn't stop. Since Catalina and Eligor never encountered Aemon's will, they didn't react like Ophelia did. Catalina looked at Aemon with expectation, and Eligor nodded as he wondered why he didn't think of that in the first place. Learning how to use the lance from Aemon. Young-ho tried recalling the time he first encountered Amon Red Eyes. Overwhelming was the only word he could think of. After that, Young-ho felt Amon's presence several times. Using its fire, controlling Ophelia, and consuming Junkaros' mind, Young-ho placed Aemon on his lap. He activated the power of evolution. Name, Aemon race, Gun race. The class, element, fire. Level. To development rate, 57U7 to Zerd. Aemon's stats were filled with question marks, but as always, Young-ho was optimistic. The development rate had increased a lot compared to last time, 57. It may be a little more than half, but when thinking optimistically, half of the rate was already filled. Young-ho was sure he would be able to evolve Amon soon. Right. They always say to strike while the iron is hot. After deactivating the power of evolution, Young-ho said it to everyone, including himself. Eligor quietly spoke with a worried expression. With all due respect, it may be dangerous. Amon's existence was too great. It was uncomfortable for Eligor to say since Young-ho ruled over him, but Young-ho was no match to Aemon in his current condition. What would happen if Aemon suppressed him? What if he gets harassed? As someone that had personally experienced Aemon, there was a hint of fear and hesitation on Ophelia's face when she heard Eligor's comment. But Catalina didn't think that way. When Young-ho first wielded Amon, Catalina was next to him, and she watched. She was also there when Young-ho first controlled its fire. Amon acknowledged Young-ho as its owner. If not, then Young-ho wouldn't have been able to control its fire. Catalina didn't express her opinion, but as they were connected as a spirit and owner, Young-ho knew how Catalina felt. Both of them softly smiled at each other. I believe in you too. Lucia raised her voice. Young-ho laughed out loud without realizing, so he fixed his posture. After taking a deep breath, he grabbed Aemon, who was sitting on his lap. He closed his eyes. No one had taught him, but he was able to figure it out. Young-ho spoke to Amon. The world was on fire. The fire kept on burning the sky and ground, which eventually became one. Someone was swinging the lance within the fire. A large male. Even though they just had a bulky build, they looked like a giant. The lance drew a wheel. Not only did it split the fire, but in the end, it even played with it. It looked like a fancy flower was blooming. Young-ho couldn't see the male's every movement. He wasn't moving fast, but that was just how Young-ho felt. It was an overwhelming amount of information. It was even difficult to imagine what kind of move he was going to make. Next, Young-ho just watched, and he was falling for it. Young-ho felt like he was one with the male's movement. He consciously closed his eyes again. He felt the fire. And different figures appeared inside Young-ho's head. It was the fire's memory. The fire burned its body and expressed everything in this world. He saw people, not one, but many. A figure holding a giant sickle was commanding the battlefield. The figure had the head of a wild goat, and they had a horn. Their body was covered in black fur. A woman that covered her face with an eye patch walked through the fire. She had gold hair, and everything on her body was red. The sword on her waist was thin, and it resembled a crescent moon. After that, many different figures passed, though. His head like a vision. Fraternal twins that were looking at each other. A barbaric warrior that was wearing a lion skin. A centaur that was aiming their arrow towards the sun. A bull-like male that was roaring while being covered in his enemy's blood. A woman with black hair that had a warm expression and was holding a water bottle. There was even more after that. He saw a woman and a man, and even saw deformed monsters. Sometimes Young-ho soon realized he had become aware Mammon's spirit. The king of greed's 12 spirits. The great spirits that controlled the demon world with the king of greed. The visions disappeared, and Young-ho saw a man's back. He was walking up the stairs. The wind made the cape flutter. The sky was blue. It wasn't the demon world's colorful sky. The man climbed the steep stairs. At the end of the staircase, a large throne made of stone was sitting there. The man didn't look back. And behind him, Mammon's spirits appeared one by one. They all followed him up the stairs. The man's name, they disappeared. Everything turned into flames and flew away. A large eye looked at Young-ho, my young owner. It was different from when Young-ho first met them. Young-ho didn't tremble in fear. Young-ho looked at Aemon as their master. Then he started speaking naturally. That was you. He was talking about the man that was walking up the stairs. the man that was twirling the lance within the fire. Even though they weren't big, it felt like they were a giant. He felt Eamon smile. Even though Eamon didn't talk a lot, Young Ho knew this time as well. That was Armin's form before they turned into a lance. The time when Armin was known as the Lance God. It was the memory of a demon that ruled the demon world long time ago. Eamon taught Mammon how to wield a lance. The fire's memories were short, but they had an impact. Young Ho understood the things that couldn't be expressed with words. Young owner. They had just learned how to walk, just like the King of Greed. Climbing those steep stairs towards the tall throne is impossible right now, but that only applies to now. If you have the will to move forward, then I will be your support, Young Ho replied with his mind and not with his voice. He felt Eamon's smile again. The fire grew bigger and covered everything. Young Ho opened his eyes. Everyone was looking at Young Ho worriedly, and when he shot up, they all became shocked by his action. Master, are you okay? Are you okay? You're not hurt anywhere, are you? Everyone was worried, so they all asked about his well-being. Young Ho blinked. He saw Catalina, who was about to cry. And then he saw the anxious Eligor, and then Ophelia, who released a sigh of relief. He also had a vision of Lucia letting out a sigh of relief as well. It's been more than 2 hours since you've contacted Armon. Everyone was really worried. We were worried. He thought it only happened for a moment, but a lot of time had passed. Young Ho realized that he was covered in cold sweat. He probably groaned during those 2 hours. He understood why Catalina's ears looked so weak and why she was looking at him with a worried expression, but it was worth it. After reassuring everyone with a soft smile, he stood up while holding Eamon. After he motioned Catalina and Eligor to step back to make room, he raised. Amon fire appeared. The red flames enveloped all of Amon and then disappeared with the wind. Oh, Catalina exclaimed. Eligor and Ophelia couldn't hide the smile that was on their faces. Armin's form changed. The 1-meter iron stick now increased to 2 meters and took on the form of a lance. Just like before, it didn't have any special shape and looked like a boring red stick. But he couldn't judge Eamon just on the outer appearance alone. Everyone that watched was able to feel Eamon's power. Young Ho wielded Eamon with both of his hands. It was different from before. He felt himself being unified with Eamon. Another fire was released, and Amon changed its form to a red bracelet. The bracelet wrapped around Young Ho's right arm as if it was alive. Catalina's ears and tail started moving at a fast pace. Eligor had tears in his eyes, and Ophelia chanted her father's name as if it was some sort of spell. Mammon's spirits. The King of Greed, Mammon, was the one walking up the stairs, and his 12 spirits were following behind him. Young Ho saw himself walking up those stairs, and he also saw his loyal spirits following behind my young owner. After it called out one last time, Armin remained silent, but Young Ho wasn't surprised. It's because he had already understood how he was going to learn about the lance from Eamon in the future. Young Ho patted Catalina's head, and then he made fun of the crying Eligor with Ophelia. A few days later, Young Ho took Skull's unit and continued the dungeon exploration. The library was another facility that was on Kaiwan's map, and he succeeded in finding it. Even though there weren't any traces of special mana in the library, there were hundreds of books. The library door had the crest of a wolf swallowing the moon, and when Young Ho opened the door, he experienced Kaiwan's memory. Kaiwan's younger sibling, who possessed a weak body, enjoyed this place. Kaiwan, who loved her younger sibling, similarly enjoyed spending time at this library. Kaiwan. Every time they found Kaiwan's inheritance, the House of Mammon became stronger. Because of her, the House of Mammon managed to survive, allowing Young Ho to become the owner. The armory, gold mine, his connection with Ophelia, the ring of distortion, and the bracelet that allowed him to store mana. Young Ho received a lot from Kaiwan. If it weren't for her inheritance, then they would have lost the dungeon. The woman with grey hair had a violent expression. Young Ho saw her smiling face when she was in front of her younger sibling. Because of that, Young Ho touched the crest with a gentle expression. A week after they discovered the library, Young Ho had now acquired all the areas that was on Kaiwan's map, and that meant that he was now in control of 80 of the first floor. Things were still hidden in the remaining 20. He didn't know how many levels the basement had, and which of Mammon's spirits and inheritance existed there. The King of Greed was walking up the stairs. Young Ho remembered seeing his back. It was slow but steady. Chapter 74. Mammon's Arena. 1. The Five's board of directors had extremely powerful skills. They were all demon kings that had their own dungeons, and these important figures were known to be physically very powerful within the large demon world. Orobas, the one with superhuman strength, was extremely powerful, but that didn't mean he wasn't strong in other areas. Bifron, the most intellectual demon, believed that Orobas' real strength was his unbreakable body. Red Demon, a fighting race, had trouble learning magic. It's safe to say that there weren't any red demons that were known to use magic, but it didn't mean that they were incompetent. Physically, they were above average, so they possessed strong mana and had the ability to use that mana to strengthen their body. This was the source for the red demons' amazing physical abilities. Body strengthening. By pouring out their mana, it makes their body both faster and firmer. Orobas could be considered as the strongest amongst the red demons, so strengthening his body more was honestly useless. But he didn't stop training. Despite becoming the great demon prince after developing himself for a long time, he was never lazy. Orobas was playing cat's cradle with his beautiful maiden Sylvia, a dryad he treasured. On the outside, it looked like he was flirting with her. But this was part of his exercise. Orobas was too strong. When Orobas didn't use his mana to strengthen his body, he needed to train himself on controlling his strength. If he used his body without thinking, giving his lovely Sylvia a light hug would break her body, causing her to die. Sylvia was playing cat's cradle extremely seriously. Orobas liked how Sylvia did her best in everything she did, no matter how small the task was. Sylvia also felt that way. In the demon world, Orobas was known to be the strongest physically, and seeing him striving to become stronger made Sylvia's heart beat faster. While playing cat's cradle, Sylvia asked Orobas a question. "Master, how come you never take a break from your tasks? It's like you're chasing someone." Orobas laughed out loud when he heard Sylvia's question. She was an odd one, but sometimes she would hit the nail on the head. "You're right. I am chasing someone. Maybe, no, to be honest, I've already surpassed their skill." Sylvia looked curious because this was the first time she heard it. It was Orobas' turn, but Sylvia put the string down and looked at him so that he could keep talking. Her mischievous behavior was cute. Orobas gently touched Sylvia's light green cheeks and replied, "It happened a long time ago. It happened when I was a really small and weak child." Orobas looked into Sylvia's green eyes. While looking into her eyes, he imagined his past, present, and future self, the red demon that completely changed his world. Before becoming the demon prince, he wondered if that demon actually existed and thought that maybe it was his imagination, as that figure was extremely powerful. Like me, they had a horn on their head, but the shape of it looked like a bull's horn, a bull. The one with horns that moves. Yeah, that's a bull. Sylvia was now in Orobas' arms. Orobas gently hugged her body and continued talking about the past. It was the story of a giant, red man. "I feel like I'm going to die." Yong-ho was in bed, and after he opened his eyes, that was the first thing he said. He really felt like he was going to die. No. In his head, he already died several times. Yong-ho and Aemon's minds were connected. In many ways, this unity was a lot stronger than the connection he had with Lucia. There was a reason why Ophelia and Junqueros encountered Amon first instead of Greed. Amon trained Yong-ho within his mind. Amon shrunk in order to match Yong-ho's skill level, so he couldn't have a long conversation with Yong-ho. But Aemon was able to show visions to Yong-ho. It was a silent training that happened in his mind. Yong-ho saw Aemon's lance skills during his prime days. He slowly familiarized it with his body. Maintaining concentration within the fiery world wasn't easy to Yong-ho. Maintaining the area he prepared for his training with Amon was difficult. Amon silently taught Yong-ho, and he wasn't sure if Amon was just quiet or if this was his teaching method. But Amon nevertheless carved the lance skill into Yong-ho's body. He was learning by repetition. After finishing his training to the point where he was losing his mind, he motioned Yong-ho to spar with him. Honestly, the process wasn't that painful. It always ended with a single blow. At least, I'm not closing my eyes anymore. However, just because he didn't close his eyes, it didn't mean he was able to grasp Aemon's attack. It's extremely important to overcome your fears and watch your opponent's attack until the very end. was what the dungeon shop's basic fighting guide said. By watching one's opponent, one can either dodge or block, one can even counterattack. Well, even before sparring with Eamon, you didn't really close your eyes anyways. That's right. The battles he had experienced was proof of that. Lucia continued talking. I'm not saying this because you're my master, but you're good at fighting. Even Ophelia said it. So have some confidence and keep fighting. Yeah, I will. Lucia smiled warmly because she was satisfied by his answer. If she was next to him, he probably would have patted her head like Catalina, skilled in fighting. He was definitely skilled. He was more talented in the fight itself than in martial arts. If he didn't come to the demon world, Yong-ho would have lived his whole life without knowing that he had talent in fighting. Yong-ho suddenly remembered his cousin that moved to England a few years ago. Even though he always looked like he was in a daze, he was physically talented and had a keen eye. It meant that he was good at grasping his opponent's movements. I wonder how he's doing. No matter where he was, his cousin was probably living a more peaceful life than Yong-ho. After getting up from his bed, Yong-ho quickly washed his face from the bowl that was prepared earlier, and then lightly stretched his body. Like always, he had a lot to do today. Even though he had slept in more than usual, he was still able to meet up with Catalina since she always had a hard time waking up in the morning. Since she slept in a bit more than usual, Catalina had a bright expression. No, is she regretting it? Her expression told him that she wanted to sleep a bit more. The reason why she had a difficult time waking up in the morning isn't because she was in a bad mood. Catalina was a mix between a dark elf and succubus, and no matter what others said, succubus was a nocturnal race. Catalina was more active at night, and that was probably because of the succubus blood that was flowing within her. Yong-ho wanted to let Catalina sleep in a bit more in the morning, but both Catalina and Eligor were against it. Both of them said there wasn't a guard alive that woke up later than their owner. An orc was now in charge of the kitchen. And after serving them a late breakfast, Yong-ho pinched Catalina's cheeks instead of petting her because she was dozing off. Catalina became sad because she was embarrassed, and after being satisfied with her expression, Yong-ho ate his soup. Will it be better if I developed their taste buds? Yong-ho was referring to the orc in the kitchen. During the past month, the number of spirits had increased, and because of that, Yong-ho found out more details about the power of evolution. It's because he had a lot of samples. First, he already knew about this. Even if two spirits were part of the same race, their skills and development were different. Second, all spirits didn't advance the same way even if they were part of the same race. There was also a difference in the advancement. He was able to find out about this difference thanks to the skeletons. The advancement process from the skeleton soldier to the warrior was different, dependent on the skeleton. For some, they have to be developed several of times in order for the skeleton warrior advancement route to appear, and for others, like Skull, the advancement route opens up after developing just once, whereas for some, the skeleton archer advancement appeared instead of the skeleton warrior. Every time a spirit develops, they require a larger development rate. Because of that, the more complicated the development process is, the harder it is for a spirit to advance. And Yong-ho assumed that there probably won't be another advancement route, after the skeleton knight Catalina and Skull have really outstanding skills. Eligor's is pretty good too. Catalina had many hidden advancement routes, and Skull was the same because every time they evolved, the advancement ranks would keep appearing. On top of that, every time they evolved or advanced, their potential development grew as well. Eligor was also pretty talented. As soon as Eligor evolved, the Red Demon Beast's next advancement was physical strength and stamina. And lastly, the most important difference. The power of evolution was applied differently between spirits that belonged to the dungeon and ordinary spirits. For ordinary spirits, unification evolution didn't appear. Even though Yong-ho couldn't break down the details of the power of evolution, there were things Yong-ho could assume based on his instincts. Unification evolution only worked on spirits that belonged to the dungeon, and even though he didn't have a lot of samples, he assumed that the power of evolution affected more on these spirits than the ordinary ones. It was obvious when thinking about the relationship between the Demon King and their spirits. After Yong-ho finished eating, he visited the mid-rank training ground that was located next to the basic training ground. Skull was training the skeletons, and when he saw Yong-ho, he smiled brightly. Since Skull advanced to a skeleton knight, they couldn't increase their development rate at the basic training ground. But the mid-rank training ground was different because the spirits trained using mana, and that's how they increased their development rate. Unlike the puppets in the basic training ground, the puppets here were able to dodge and counterattack. Since it was like being in a real battle, spirits were able to increase their development rate at a faster pace. Yong-ho displayed a satisfied look on his face as he watched the skeletons train. The skeletons all looked the same at first, but now he was able to see their different personalities. Skull's group had to be the perfect team. That's why Yong-ho didn't evolve the skeletons the same way. For the skeletons that will be holding a shield and in charge of the defense, he strengthened their bones and developed their frame. Whereas for the ones that will use a lance or shoot arrows, he evolved them individually depending on their skills. Skull. Skull. Skull all. Skull talked while swinging his hammer. Even though Yong-ho didn't understand, it sounded like Skull was saying the skeletons needed to be trained more. Yong-ho patted Skull on their shoulder. Training in the mid-rank training ground all night must have paid off because their development rate was almost full. Is Iron next? After the rock skeleton warrior, it was the Iron Skeleton Knight. Iron Golem was waiting in the corner of the mid-rank training ground, and after Yong-ho looked back and forth between the Golem and Skull, he laughed and looked towards the basic training ground. The princesses Ant and Spot were using the lifeless puppets to train. After developing her emotions, Princess Ant had a much more noticeable expression. Even though she still looked like a girl, it felt like she had matured. It's safe to say that thanks to the spirit training grounds, the development rate of the spirits had increased much faster. The Goblin Rangers and the Orcs also visited whenever they had the time to increase their development rate. An elite group. Oh yes, an elite group. The beginning was difficult, but the result would make it worth it. After feeling satisfied with the mid-rank training ground, he headed to the arena that was located on the left. Ophelia and Eligor were having fun in there, one round. After Ophelia called it out energetically, she quickly stood up. While Eligor was lying on the floor and wasn't moving, Yong-ho spoke after clicking his tongue. Go easy on the old man. Oh geez, Eligor is still young when considering his condition, right, older brother? Even though Ophelia spoke while giggling, Eligor didn't reply this time either. He was probably exhausted because he didn't even greet Yong-ho. But why do you always wrestle at the end? Just hitting each other isn't enough. It's also good for training your senses. Yong-ho wondered if it really was effective after seeing Eligor on the ground, but when he thought about it, he repeatedly experienced the same thing from Amon. He understood Eligor's pain as he looked at him, and Ophelia approached Yong-ho with a smile. Master, would you like to spar? Thanks for the offer, but I have work to do. Go another round with Eligor. Eligor flinched when he heard Yong-ho's suggestion, but no one paid any attention. Ophelia slightly tilted her head and asked Yong-ho, are you going to look around the first floor again? I wanted to look around more. There was a reason why Kaiwan only explored 80 of the first floor. It was easy to find the first floor, and out of the entire area, the first floor made up 80 of it. The hidden 20. The arena, as well as the passageway that led underground, was probably included in that 20. In some ways, Yong-ho was being too hasty. Even though Lucia grew a lot, there still wasn't enough mana because the number of facilities within the dungeon was increasing at a fast pace. For the areas that he found recently, Lucia was barely able to control them. Even if Yong-ho found the passageway that led underground, it would be impossible for Lucia to control it. But still, he wanted to find the remaining 20. Ophelia rated Yong-ho's ambition very highly, so she acknowledged his request. Instead of asking Yong-ho again, she helped Eligor stand up. Yong-ho let Ophelia take care of Eligor and walked out of the room with Catalina, who kept on looking back. He then headed deeper into the dungeon. Chapter 75. Mammon's Arena 2. Among the facilities that were located deep within the dungeon, the library and the magic laboratory were probably the most important. Kaiwan's library was actually pretty empty. It was because there simply wasn't a large enough variety of books. Nevertheless, the books were still taken care of pretty well. He knew that Kaiwan had used them with the utmost care. Since most of the spirits in the House of Mammon didn't really read books, no one was using the library. The spirits, however, were told to register if they ever wanted to use it, but Eligor was the only one that did, and the sole book that he was interested in was the cooking one. After passing the library, that still lingered with Kaiwan and her little brother's scent, Yong-ho headed towards the magic laboratory. The laboratory was just as big as the training ground. Half of the room was empty space, which was probably used to test out magic spells. According to Lucia, this place was used to study various types of magic, but we don't have anyone to do that. Out of the spirits within the House of Mammon, Ophelia was the only one that was skilled in magic, but she was a red demon. The fact that she was able to use magic was already amazing, so it would be hard to ask her to do any more. Yong-ho again realized how important a magician was. He decided to look into it the next time he visited the dungeon shop's virtual space. After stepping out of the lab, Yong-ho stopped. Even though Kaiwan had developed 80 of the first floor, it didn't mean she had filled every part of it. When Yong-ho was thinking about installing new facilities in the first half of the dungeon, he had made a few empty rooms, and Kaiwan's first floor had empty rooms as well. The place connected to the remaining 20. He looked at the dungeon map that was floating in the air, and after thinking for a bit, Yong-ho looked back. Since it was still morning, Catalina was trying her best to stay awake. Catalina, yes sir, I wasn't falling asleep, I wasn't really. Her voice became quiet towards the end of her sentence. Yong-ho knew that she wasn't falling asleep, so he just patted her head. Now that I think about it, how did Catalina become a spirit in the House of Mammon, and as a guard? It was a question that suddenly popped into his mind. Yong-ho and Catalina had a close relationship because he was the Demon King, and she was a spirit that belonged to the House of Mammon. However, they didn't know a lot about each other. I should ask, it'll wake her up and change the mood. After contemplating a bit, Yong-ho made his decision. He asked in a friendly tone, "How did you become a spirit for the House of Mammon?" It was more direct than he originally thought. Catalina flapped her ears once and answered with a warm smile. "I was thrown away in the Free City, and the former guard took me in." She could have felt bitter about it, but her face didn't show any signs of such thoughts. She continued speaking in an affectionate and longing tone. "It happened when I was really young, but I still remember the very day I became a spirit under the House of Mammon. I was an orphan, and it became my very first home. I'm not very good at expressing my feelings, but I really like the House of Mammon. I really like it. I also really like you as well, sir." Catalina finished talking with a bright smile, but instantly became embarrassed. Like she had mentioned, she wasn't good at expressing herself, but she especially became embarrassed because of what she said last, and Yong-ho became embarrassed as well. It was because of a very simple reason. It's my first time Yong-ho had attended an all-boys school and majored in engineering. This was the first time someone close to his age, or at least looked close to his age, told him that they liked him. Yong-ho was the first one that calmed down. He thought logically, Therese, a lot of meaning behind the word. Like Catalina also liked the House of Mammon and Eligor. Yong-ho patted her head again. "Shall we keep moving?" "Yes, sir." Catalina's ears looked slightly weak for some reason, but she answered confidently. The remaining 20 wasn't just made out of inactive rooms. Most of them were actual walls, and in order to create a path, the dungeon required a lot more mana and time investment than before. Yong-ho focused on the fact that Kaiwan kept the arena a secret from the other spirits. A secret path will never remain a secret forever, as someone could coincidentally find it when they passed by. A place where there wasn't a lot of people, a place that only Kaiwan visited, a place close to the remaining 20. He excluded the library. The library was like a castle to Kaiwan's younger brother, so she probably didn't create a passageway between the library and the arena. Yong-ho walked forwards. Kaiwan's break room was located deep within the dungeon, and in that room, which was a bit larger than Yong-ho's bedroom, he activated greed's power. Desire, expectation, craving. He set his mind on it. Greed rose out of Yong-ho's body like fire, and after splitting into many sections, it searched all the rooms. Yong-ho gathered all of the sections into one. The section that was wrapped around Catalina became the base, and when greed became whole, it pointed to one direction. Yong-ho suddenly recalled the time he first encountered Aemon. Yong-ho followed greed, and when he saw the crest of a wolf swallowing a moon on the wall, he placed his hand on it. The mana awakened the power that was flowing through the House of Mammon's blood, a secret passageway. The wall next to the crest made a sound and opened like in the movies. The passage that it revealed was so narrow that only one person would be able to walk through it. Greed continued guiding Yong-ho. Yong-ho gulped, and after looking back at Catalina, she quickly grabbed the lighting device and gave it to him. "I'll take the lead." That's what he told Catalina after she gave him the device. Catalina had the ability to see in the dark, but since Yong-ho was being guided by greed, it was more efficient for him to lead. Catalina hesitated for a moment because she was the guard, but in the end decided to let Yong-ho lead. The passageway was longer than he had imagined. The cold darkness consumed both the light and sound, and the deep silence prevented them from hearing their own footsteps. This overwhelmed both Yong-ho and Catalina. Yong-ho continued walking, and then stopped moments later. It wasn't because they were at the end of the passageway. We got disconnected. He couldn't feel Lucia, who was always connected with him. Even though he was inside the dungeon, it felt like he was outside instead. Yong-ho felt disconnected. When did he lose connection with Lucia? Or did they instead get disconnected right after entering the passageway? When I obtained Aemon, he got disconnected with Lucia back then, too. Yong-ho had a hunch. This passageway must be outside of Lucia's control range. But that didn't stop him. Yong-ho followed Greed's guidance. Moments later, time was also consumed by the darkness. Yong-ho couldn't tell how long he had been walking through this passageway. Another step, Greed's guidance suddenly disappeared. Even though he was still in darkness, Yong-ho was now able to see a large door. A crest of a dragon that was reigning over the world. Even though he didn't extend his hand out, the door opened. The light consumed the darkness. "Welcome to the House of Mammon's Arena." The voice woke him up. The voice belonged to a female and was slightly deep and rough. Before them was a dark hallway made out of stone. It was wider than the secret passageway. 4 people could probably walk through it together. Yong-ho breathed in and looked around. Naturally, there should have been another door behind the door he had walked through. However, instead, it revealed a long hallway. Catalina kept her guard up while looking straight ahead. Yong-ho also saw a woman in front of them. It was a woman that was wearing a large, black robe. She was also wearing an empty, gray mask, so he couldn't see her face. If it wasn't for the robe that was wrapped tightly around her body, he wouldn't even have known that she was a woman. After showing her respect to Yong-ho, she fixed her posture. Yong-ho became nervous when he heard, "The House of Mammon's Arena," and the woman closed the distance between them. She spoke more quietly and discreetly than before. "The one that found the arena, what is your name, and what is your father's name?" When the woman approached, Catalina reacted. Yong-ho restrained Catalina with his hand and spoke while looking at the woman's mask. "Chun Yong-ho. I'm the House of Mammon's new owner. My father's name is Chun Do-il." The woman didn't reply to Yong-ho's answer right away. It could have been his imagination, but he felt her feeling embarrassed and disappointed. Before he could ask why, she came closer. She asked in a slightly more impatient tone, "Then, your grandfather's name, that's enough." A new voice interrupted her. A very large hand divided the space between Yong-ho and the woman. The new voice had suddenly appeared, and since they weren't able to feel its presence, Catalina became surprised, causing her to take out her weapon. Yong-ho also backed up. The new voice belonged to a giant that was wearing a black suit. The giant had red skin, 2 horns on his forehead, and a long red tail. Ophelia and Eligor both came to Yong-ho's mind. The giant looked at Yong-ho while stroking his beard and then smiled. "Please excuse my assistant's rudeness. My name is Gusion, and I'm the manager of the arena." Greeting him back was the right thing to do. But Yong-ho couldn't do so because of the thought that suddenly popped into his mind. The woman who was standing behind Gusion. Yong-ho noticed that she was acting impatient. It was a ridiculous thought. There wasn't enough proof, but he had a hunch. "Kaiwan," the woman reacted. The impatient woman looked up, and Gusion's smile became twisted. Catalina watched Gusion while cold sweat was rolling down her face. They then heard a voice. "Are you Cayenne's descendant? How's Cayenne doing?" "I said that's enough." The giant's power exploded. The power that suddenly exploded overwhelmed everything. The woman who was frantically asking questions sat down while releasing a painful moan, and Catalina's hands started shaking. Catalina knew she had to protect Yong-ho, so she managed to stand in place. But that was her limit. Gusion glared at Yong-ho. The overpowering energy Gusion released made it seem like he was going to put down Yong-ho at any moment. But at that moment, There was something that tore his energy into pieces. There was something that consumed that power and protected Yongho fire. It wasn't the green fire that represented Yongho's soul. It was the red lotus fire that rose up and pushed away Gusion's pressure. This time, Gusion displayed various expressions. Anger, shock, and joy he simply couldn't contain. Amen. Is it really, Amen? Amen answered. The red lotus fire became bigger and was even more beautiful. His monstrous voice filled the entire hallway. Kneel in front of the king of greed, Gusion, the one who possesses superhuman strength. Mammon's spirit. Confronting a giant was more than enough to destroy everything around them. Catalina just couldn't endure it anymore, causing her to collapse. But Yongho managed to hold her by her waist. Green flames rose up within the red lotus. Gusion looked at Yongho. Yongho also looked at Gusion. Despite the really tense atmosphere, Gusion spoke. Mammon's spirit, Gusion, acknowledges the king of greed's return. He didn't kneel. It actually seemed like Gusion was trying to test Yongho. Yongho didn't really mind it, and instead of looking back at Gusion, he looked to the side. It wasn't because he was scared of Gusion. He instead looked at the woman that was on the ground and panting. Her mask was off. Her eyes were filled with despair, disappointment, and embarrassment instead of fierceness. Through her tightly sealed lips, she expressed the feelings that she simply couldn't hide. Yongho was sure. He knew that face and voice. The owner covered in ash, Kaiwan, the demon king of distortion. It was her. Chapter 76, Mammon's Arena 3. It felt like an intense feeling was held in his hands. When she realized that Yongho wasn't the son of Kaien, her younger brother, she was disappointed, but she couldn't give up. Maybe he was Kaien's descendant. Maybe not his son, but either his grandson or great-grandson. Kaiwan even asked how her brother was doing. However, she couldn't talk. Besides her feelings, there were other things that she wanted to say, but she still couldn't say anything. It wasn't because she was trying to control her anxious and impatient emotions. She simply wasn't allowed to speak. Kaiwan's lips didn't open and just twitched. Yongho knew why. Gusion, he was controlling Kaiwan. He didn't give her permission to speak. Yongho was able to imagine it in his head. He also had an idea as to how Kaiwan was alive, despite the rumors saying that she had died. Gusion was still looking at Yongho. It was cold. His eyes were filled with many different emotions, but it was obvious that Gusion didn't like him. Yongho felt Gusion resisting. It was more like impulse. It was probably because of Kaiwan. This was the first time he'd ever saw Kaiwan up close. They had never talked before. But Yongho always felt thankful towards her. He pitied her and felt warmth after seeing how much she loved her younger brother. Yongho didn't know the details, but after knowing that Gusion was controlling her, he didn't like him. Kaien is the name of the owner from 2 generations ago. It's been over a decade since you've disappeared. Yongho spoke. Intense emotions filled Kaiwan's eyes. She gasped when she heard about her brother. She wanted to hear more. Yongho then realized that he had made a mistake. Kaiwan was expecting it. When Kaiwan disappeared, she was in her 20s. Her brother, Kaien, was a teen, so even if it's been over 10 years, there's a very high chance that he was still alive. Isn't it possible for her to meet her brother? Wouldn't she be able to reunite with him? She couldn't open her mouth. Kaiwan couldn't continue the conversation, and she didn't want to hear mention of his death. She desperately desired to see him. Tears were rolling down her white cheeks. Despite having fierce-looking eyes, her eyes were filled with different emotions, and Yongho felt sorry for her. He was the owner from 2 generations ago. Whether he died from an accident or at an early age, there was a high chance that he had died. Kaiwan didn't consider that possibility. No, it's more like she was deliberately ignoring it. Her eyes moved to Yongho's finger, the ring that she gave to her brother, the object that contained the power of distortion. You're Kaien's successor, are you his grandson? Is Kaien's blood flowing through you? Yongho felt like he could hear her. She sounded so desperate that it was painful to just look at her. Tell me something, anything. It was a quiet cry, and it was completely blocked. When Gusion's hand came between them, the darkness consumed Kaiwan. The darkness covered the location where Kaiwan was standing. Yongho glared at Gusion. Gusion enjoyed the way Yongho was glaring at him. He enjoyed how hostile Young-ho was, and his expression told Young-ho to come at him. I think the gatekeeper was acting very rudely. I just wanted the minions to take her, so just stop. It looks like you're going to hit me, Gusyeon. Armin spoke quietly. He was slightly angry, but Gusyeon chuckled as if he didn't care. One greeting is enough to show respect, and I only did it because of you. Amen. Just because he has the power of greed doesn't mean this kid is actually Master Mammon. And just because he's the owner of the House of Mammon doesn't mean he's my owner as well. In Mammon's spirit, Mammon is my only owner. Gusyeon looked more fierce. He was almost growling towards the end. This is the arena, and I am Gusyeon, the manager of this place. The arena has its own rules, and the only one who can break them is Mammon, so obey the rules. The already big Gusyeon looked even larger. Young-ho felt like he was going to be crushed. Armin released his fire and managed to protect Young-ho and Catalina from Gusyeon's pressure, but it wasn't enough. Catalina's body was covered in sweat, and she was panting, and Young-ho had to use his remaining power to release the fire. A faint smile appeared on Gusyeon's face. You returned to your previous form on your own. Amon, is it to match with the owner of an empty house, huh? This place is filled with Master Mammon's power, but that's all you can do. As your rival, it's very disappointing. That was my choice. Don't look down upon my young owner, Gusyeon, like you had mentioned. You should be following the arena's rules. I'm not your opponent. Face the king of greed. You're still acting like a teacher's pet. Gusyeon stretched and gathered his strength. The enormous amount of pressure disappeared, and the blank space consumed Catalina and Young-ho once more. Young-ho tried his best to stand still while Catalina was holding on to Young-ho's arm that was wrapped around her waist. The king of greed, Ammon's young owner. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Gusyeon, and I'm the manager of Master Mammon's arena out of Mammon's spirits. I'm definitely the greatest of them all. Gusyeon extended his hand out for a handshake. Young-ho wasn't sure if Gusyeon was being considerate or if he was left-handed, but he extended his left hand out anyway. Young-ho looked at Gusyeon as he extended his left hand out. His hand was rough and strong. It felt like he was touching a hard rock and not a person's hand, a guard that relies on her owner. Even if it's an empty house, the House of Mammon has definitely fallen. Catalina flinched when she heard Gusyeon's comment. When anger filled Young-ho's face again, Gusyeon released a satisfied laugh. Let's not talk while standing. Like Amon mentioned, we need to follow the arena's rules. Shall we go inside? The arena was dangerous. Gusyeon wasn't friendly. But Young-ho didn't want to avoid his provocation. He wanted to know about Kaiwan and the arena's rules that Gusyeon had mentioned earlier. Young master, he will not be able to harm you directly. Don't worry. You are the king of greed, and I am here with you. Only Young-ho was able to hear Amon's voice. Like Gusyeon mentioned earlier, Mammon's power was filled within the arena. Normally, Young-ho wouldn't be able to talk with Amon like this, so just how powerful was Amon? Greed opened its eyes within Young-ho. The fire within him told him to move forward. I'll go with you. Catalina gritted her teeth. She didn't rely on Young-ho and stood on her own. Gusyeon ridiculed Catalina with his eyes. Young-ho felt angry again. Armin calmed Young-ho down. He supported Young-ho and gave him strength. Even though Catalina didn't have Armin's protection, she still stood up straight and met Gusyeon's eyes. Catalina's determination and feelings could be seen in her eyes. She didn't care if others talked badly about her. She did it for Young-ho, to protect her owner's honor, so she decided to endure it with everything she had. Because of that, Young-ho calmed his anger. Instead of losing it, he spoke to Gusyeon in an angry tone. Lead the way, Gusyeon. Explain the arena's rules as you wish. This way. Gusyeon turned around and took the lead. It was only for a moment, but right before he turned around, he had a pleasant and kind smile. Every time Gusyeon took a step, the light on the ceiling turned on and lit up the dark hallway. Gusyeon started to speak. Master Mammon built this place to help the future generations grow, and for me, well, half of it was also probably for entertainment. Young-ho understood the part about the future generations. But for Gusyeon, including myself, a lot of spirits exist within the arena. The arena is a separate area from that empty House of Mammon. There are many levels within this place, and there are spirits that are in charge of those levels. I call them floor masters. Yong-ho read about this in Kaiwan's journal. Yong-ho analyzed Guxian's explanation. When he called the House of Mammon empty, he was probably looking down on Mammon's descendants for not being able to control greed's labyrinth and remaining on the first floor. Or he could use that word because it was actually empty. It was something he had been thinking about ever since Citri mentioned greed's labyrinth. Could it be that there were two dungeons within the House of Mammon Greed's labyrinth, and a dungeon to hide greed's labyrinth? Guxian continued explaining. The arena's rules are simple. The challenger will go up against the floor masters on each floor. If the challenger wins, then they'll receive the reward that Master Mammon has prepared, and if they lose, they'll be punished. The punishment is different for each level. Well, the master did build it for future generations, so the punishments aren't that bad, but there are levels that are still pretty bad, Yong-ho recalled Kaiwan's face. She made the House of Mammon stronger through the arena, but she eventually disappeared one day. But now, Guxian, who managed the arena, was treating Kaiwan like a slave. Yong-ho was sure it was her punishment. Anyone can become a challenger. A guard, butler, or even an ordinary spirit can become a challenger. The reward is the same despite of status. However, their punishment is a lot worse. Like I've mentioned many times before, this place was built for future generations. It's only fair that the reward and punishment are on the same level. Guxian stopped walking. Once they passed a dark hallway, an extremely large room appeared. It was as big as the Colosseum in Rome. There were thousands of seats, and below them there was a giant circular arena. Even though it was indoors, they could feel a cool wind. Guxian turned around with his back towards it. He looked at Yong-ho and opened up his arms. And the arena's last rule. Master Mammon left this last rule for the future generations, as well as for myself. The challenger that beats every level will become the owner of the arena. They'll be able to control all the spirits that's within the arena, as well as myself. Another strong wind blew through the room. Guxian had a big smile on his face. Amon's young owner, do you want to know about Kaiwan? Do you want to free her? Do you want to make me kneel? In that case, conquer the arena, become the owner of this body. Only if you believe you can do it. Guxian laughed out loud. There was a loud roar, and the door to the hallway suddenly closed. Another rule. Those that enter the arena can't just leave. They need to try at least one level. When in a group, it's fine if only one of the members fights. Guxian looked down at Yong-ho. Instead of answering, Yong-ho raised his right arm and released green flames. Aemon, who was wrapped around Yong-ho's wrist, transformed into a fiery lance, and Yong-ho grabbed him. Guxian laughed. He was laughing because he was actually having fun. He laughed out loud for a long time. We have a new challenger. Welcome to the arena, King of Greed, Mammon's arena. The fight on the first floor had begun. Chapter 77, The Red Lotus Demon. Lance Aemon, 1. A man wearing a black robe and a beast-shaped mask guided Yong-ho. Even though their outfit was similar to Kaiwan's, they had a large and firm body, so it was easy to tell that they were a male. However, they didn't show any interest towards Yong-ho. All they did was walk ahead slowly. Could it be that he used to be an owner too? The House of Mammon's history was long. Kaiwan probably wasn't the only one that found the arena and became a challenger. Once they were near the audience seats, the man opened a door to a hallway that led to the arena. After meeting Yong-ho, he spoke for the first time. The challenger may enter the arena. Those that came with the challenger cannot enter. Please watch from here. He spoke in an unsophisticated way, and the way he talked was rather awkward. Instead of replying, Yong-ho looked down at the arena. He imagined a tower because Guxian mentioned that there were floor masters on each level and stairs that led to the dungeon. But it seemed like the floor masters actually came to the arena master, Catalina, called Yong-ho. She used up a lot of her mental energy from trying to endure in front of Guxian, so she looked like she was going to pass out at any moment. Her large eyes were filled with anxiety and concern. She didn't show it in front of Guxian, but when she first encountered Kaiwan, Catalina was actually really agitated. What if Yong-ho ends up in the same position as Kaiwan? Yong-ho understood how she felt. He was worried as well, but he smiled nonetheless. He used his empty left hand and patted Catalina's head. "I'll be back. I'll be waiting." Catalina replied confidently. Like always, her tail and ears showed her true emotions. Yong-ho smiled again. After patting her head once more, he turned around. He walked towards the arena without any hesitation. The arena's atmosphere was cold. Despite the fact that there were thousands of seats, only a few of them were filled up. They were filled with a small group of spirits from the arena, and since there were only about 30 of them, it was impossible to fill all the seats. But because of that, it was easy to spot Yong-ho. He was like a dark tree standing in a field of white snow. Out of the spirits that belonged to the arena, there were some that were able to move freely. Some male, some female. There were kids, elders, young women and teenagers. While sitting in groups of twos or threes, they were looking at both Yong-ho and Catalina. Catalina felt them looking at her, but she didn't turn around or approach them. She just sat in her seat and solely focused on Yong-ho. Gusion sat in a special seat that was located in the center of the audience seats. 3 chairs were located within the large space. The seat right of Gusion was empty, but on his left, a figure that was on the same level as Gusion was sitting there. Amon, or more like his alter ego, was sitting there in the form of a red lotus flower fire. It was safe to say that Mamon's arena was Mamon's magic barrier. Even though Aemon's body was with Yong-ho, it was possible for him to take a part of his conscious and place it next to Gusion. Gusion scratched his chin as he watched Yong-ho walk towards the arena after patting Catalina's head. Gusion put on an uninterested look as if to hide his true feelings. Do they have a chance? Are you interested? Gusion didn't reply right away when Aemon asked. He pouted for a moment and then snorted. It was a stupid question. You're only serving under that young owner because he has a chance at winning. He was speaking to Aemon, the red lotus flower lance. Out of all of Mamon's spirits, Aemon was special, so he probably wouldn't decide on an owner so easily. However, or maybe he was in a hurry. Amon wasn't in the arena like Gusion Therese, a possibility that Amon made a hasty decision since he was the only one that knew how much time had passed. I know what you're thinking, but I want to ask you too. Isn't it you that's been pressed for time? Gusion flinched because it seemed like Aemon read his mind. Amon was able to learn a lot of things just from the way Gusion treated Yong-ho. But he stayed silent, and Gusion gritted his teeth. Gusion stopped scratching his chin and leaned back into his chair. As you know, we're unable to feel the same sense of time in the arena. A majority of the flow of time has been suppressed. But it's also because this space is Master Mamon's barrier, Kaiwan. It's understandable as to why she's so cautious. She knows that time has passed, but doesn't exactly know how much. Sometimes it feels like it's only been a few days, but it's actually been a few years. Gusion closed his eyes. He was able to vividly remember a few memories. But I do have an idea, because I'm used to this space. It's not like I spend my time sleeping like Kaiwan and the other floor masters. A lot of time has passed. Over 1,000 years have already passed, but it feels like it only happened yesterday. The time when I followed the master and walked up those stairs. Skyscraper stairs. It was like Gusion had mentioned. Amon was able to vividly remember that moment as well. And that wasn't the only thing he was able to remember. Mammon, the king of greed. The greatest demon king in the demon world's history. His last moment. Gusion gritted his teeth. Even though he didn't mention it, it was obvious that he was thinking about that moment. Gusion, I know, Aemon. It was the master's wish, and because of that, I still respect him. I just want to follow him and walk up those stairs again. Even if it's in my dreams. Gusion released a heavy sigh. Instead of replying to him, Amon gave him some time. It's been a while since I've had an emotional conversation like this. Gusion smiled. He leaned forward again and made a demeaning comment. Don't worry. It's safe to say that there aren't any punishments on the first floor. Your young master may feel disappointed from being defeated, but he won't die or get detained. Only Gusion was able to make such annoying comments like that. Aemon smiled. Even though he was just a fire, Gusion knew. And because of that, he had high expectations. He didn't make those comments to Yong-ho just to provoke him. It's starting. Amon spoke Gusion, and Amon turned their attention to the arena and watched Yong-ho. Mamon's arena, first floor, floor master, Steelox. Max number of challenges per day, 3 reward, 2 choices, punishment, mental pain, Yong-ho slightly opened his eyes when he read the letters of light that were displayed in the air. He made a short comment. It's honest. On the other side of the large stadium, that was about 50 meters in diameter, a large ox was standing there. It was as if they were made out of steel because Yong-ho felt a certain heaviness. The steel ox released a low growl. They were about 2 meters tall with a horn on its head that was both extremely long and large. Fire came out of its nose every time it breathed out. After coming to the demon world, Yong-ho had fought against both a salamander and a landworm. But this was his first time fight against an ox. But in the end, the basics are the same. Yong-ho changed his pose as he wielded Armon with this right hand. Armon was now 2 meters long, and Yong-ho's lance technique was closer to the Eastern style rather than the Western style ready start. As soon as the letters of light shattered, he heard the sound of a loud drum. But Yong-ho wasn't able to focus on anything. The ground was shaking. The steel ox jumped forward and charged like a runaway locomotive. Yong-ho quickly threw himself to the side. He couldn't counter it head-on. After rolling on the ground once, he stood up. The ox passed through the area that Yong-ho was originally standing in, and after moving about 20 meters, the steel ox quickly changed its direction. As soon as Yong-ho stood up, he kicked off the ground. He didn't have time. Yong-ho moved as soon as he thought of it. He waved Amon roughly in the air and created a wave of fire. The wave of fire that was released head-on was pretty horrifying. However, the steel ox must have not cared because it didn't slow down in the slightest. The ox instead charged even faster and broke through the wave of fire. The fire dispersed. As expected, the fire didn't affect the steel ox at all. The ox didn't even stay within the fire for that long. But there were results nevertheless. Yong-ho's original plan was to blind the steel ox so he didn't have to roll around to dodge the ox's attacks. He remained standing at the side while the steel ox charged in a straight line. As soon as the steel ox realized that it had missed, it tried to change directions, but its speed got in the way. Right when the ox was about to turn, Yong-ho targeted its ankle and attacked with Amon Clank. Amon bounced off as the sound of metal filled the stadium. The unexpected counter made Yong-ho's arms numb. Even though Yong-ho was the one that attacked, he was affected more than the ox. Fire came out of the steel ox's nose. His opponent changed direction, and Yong-ho couldn't wait any longer. He ignored the pain he felt in his arms and threw his body when the ox charged yet again. The ox was fast and hard. Fire and ordinary attacks didn't work. Catalina was really nervous. Most of the spirits that were watching started laughing when they saw Yong-ho roll around on the ground. Cold sweat started rolling down Yong-ho's face. Even though his attacks had failed, he didn't lose concentration or feel discouraged. He released another wave of fire and blocked the view between him and the steel ox. The ox's attacks were simple. They were fast, but they moved in a straight line, so Yong-ho was able to predict its attacks. Just blocking the ox's view was more than enough to decrease its accuracy. The ox charged again. Yong-ho had an idea while dodging his opponent. He was clearly aware of the arena's entire structure and his current position. He read the mana's flow. The power of evolution analyzed targets for development purposes. And of course, the flow of mana was included in that analysis. The steel ox wasn't Yong-ho's spirit. It was impossible to do an analysis. But it didn't matter. Right now, Yong-ho wasn't expecting the steel ox's development information. Red mana was flowing out of the steel ox. That mana created a constant flow. The ox didn't simply use their strength to charge towards Yong-ho. The ox also used mana to charge really fast. The flow of mana showed Yong-ho the direction the steel ox was going to go. Boom! The ground shook. Yong-ho dodged the ox's attack once again. The steel ox became angry and released a growl. Yong-ho gulped. Reading the flow of mana during a battle was really difficult, but he had to continue doing it. He also didn't forget about the arena's structure. Whenever the steel ox charged, it created fire. The ox threw itself while charging in a straight line. A different sound was released this time. It seemed like the entire stadium was shaking. Beyond the fire that was destroyed, Yong-ho saw the steel ox twist its body. The ox's horn was stuck to a wall, like Yong-ho had expected, but he had to delay his opponent more. Yong-ho immediately made his next move. This time, Yong-ho charged towards the steel ox. His plan to make the steel ox charge in a straight line and crash into the wall was great. It wasn't exactly the most creative plan, but since he actually executed it, Gusyeon gave Yong-ho a lot of points. But what was he going to do now? Yong-ho's attack didn't affect the steel ox. Despite the fact that the ox crashed into the wall, its horns were perfectly fine. Gusyeon leaned forward more. The spirits that were watching spoke louder. Catalina clenched her hands. Kaiwan, who wasn't allowed to speak, desperately watched Yong-ho. Yong-ho jumped. Amon transformed into a knife and released fire once again. The wave of fire was useless. Yong-ho knew it as well. That's why he targeted something else this time. He focused the fire towards the tip of the blade. Instead of creating a large fire, he focused a small amount on a single area and created a fiery blade. Amon's tip shined brightly. An immense amount of heat was released from the white light. The steel ox felt the need to be cautious. It used its strength to twist its body, and before Yong-ho could reach it, the ox destroyed the arena's wall and turned around. Yong-ho wasn't surprised. He read the mana this time too. The steel ox's horn was drawing a curve, and when Yong-ho charged towards it, the ox barely managed to dodge him. Because of that, Amon pierced into the steel ox's body. It worked. The fiery blade pierced through the ox's body. It screamed, but Yong-ho didn't stop. He poured the remaining mana through Amon fire, shot out of the holes that were all over the steel ox's body. The ox looked down on Yong-ho because of the wave of fire he released earlier, but now the ox was powerless against the fire that was entering it. It couldn't even scream. The ox weakly fell to the ground. It transformed into light and disappeared. The spirits that were watching clapped with joy. Catalina stood up from her seat and flapped her ears and wagged her tail while Kaiwan released a sigh of relief. First floor completed successfully. Please choose your award. Words of light appeared in front of Yong-ho. Instead of replying, he turned around and looked up. He looked at Gusyeon, who was sitting in the middle of the audience seats. Gusyeon looked down back at him. He couldn't contain his excitement when Yong-ho looked at him. He knew how Yong-ho fought. He knew that Yong-ho read the flow of mana and was able to freely control the fire by using Amon. You asked if he had a chance. Right, Amon asked, and Gusyeon momentarily looked at Amon with a blank expression. A big smile appeared on his face as he nodded. You chose a worthy owner, Amon, but you're making a mistake if you think he'll become my owner just from this one battle. Even Kaiwan completed the first floor. Instead of replying, Amon created a bigger fire. He looked at his young owner. Chapter 78. The Red Lotus Demon, Lance Amon 2. When both Amon and Gusyeon were looking at Yong-ho, Yong-ho also looked back at them. He then looked at Catalina and smiled, who was joyfully jumping up and down and looked like she was going to jump at him at any moment. He then further observed the rest of the audience. Most of the spirits in the audience were spirits that he didn't know the names of. However, Kaiwan was sitting amongst them. She was far away, so he couldn't read her expression. However, there was a certain warmth that simply couldn't be contained, and he felt it. If he yelled, she could probably hear him, but Yong-ho wasn't able to say anything. What would he say to her now that her younger brother fell sick and died, that he lost everything his loving sister achieved, and was depressed until his very last breath? He had to tell her eventually. But now wasn't the time. Not now. Yong-ho turned around again. Even though the steel ox's corpse had turned into light and disappeared, a pile of light still remained in the same spot. It was similar to the distortion that he had saw before, a lump of pure mana. Mammon's arena wasn't created only to provide fighting experience and various artifacts to the future generations. This lump of pure mana was probably the reward they would have received once they defeated the floor master. Yong-ho reached out with his left hand without hesitation. The colorful mana was swirling and it sucked into Yong-ho's hand. It was the same as absorbing ordinary spirits. Nothing was different. Overwhelming pleasure. A feeling that his mana had been increased. But moments later, Yong-ho had a hunch. It was different from the other spirits he had absorbed. Not only greed, but the blood flowing within him was screaming at him that it was different. Mammon's mana. Traces of the king was contained in Yong-ho and Kaiwan's mana. But this was much more than that. It was Mammon's actual mana. When he realized it, he felt even more pleasure. The purity and intensity of it made his spirit tremble. Ancestors' power. It was the greatest piece of power which acted as the source of the House of Mammon's kings. When comparing just the amount of pure mana, it was actually less than the mana he had obtained when he defeated Forus. However, it had a different effect. All of Yongho's body reacted to Mammon's power, and the effect of synergy between them was really surprising. Kaiwan was definitely a genius. She was also hard-working at the same time. Even so, she was still extremely strong for her age. How was that possible? What made her really strong? He had solved that riddle just now. Mammon's arena made her strong. The power of the ancestors of the House of Mammon had awakened her, and Yongho didn't stop there. The moment Mammon's power made him shudder, there was a skill that made him open his eyes. Green flames rose out of Yongho's eyes. The experiences he had stacked prior to fighting Forus were screaming at him. Evolve, advance, advance forward. It was in front of everyone, including Gusyeon. But Yongho couldn't hold himself back any longer. Greed was urging deep within his body. The power of evolution encouraged greed, mana, development. Light enveloped Yongho's body. The green fire covered his entire body, and it grew larger. All the spirits were surprised. Even Catalina couldn't calm down. But there was someone else who was the most surprised. Gusyeon stood up from his seat. He was speechless. He yelled out a question without looking back. Is that really the power of evolution? Amon didn't answer. The answer to Gusyeon's question was already in front of him. Yongho roared. The green fire shot up and then disappeared after breaking up into smaller pieces. The third horn that was on Yongho's forehead disappeared. New horns appeared on top of the two horns that were located right above his ears. The fourth horn. The number of horns represented how powerful one's mana was. Yongho didn't develop his mana. He broke it and created a new set. It was bigger and deeper than before, and this time he could fill it with even stronger mana. Yongho wasn't the only one that transformed. Within a demon family, gaining another horn is like a turning point for the one that gains it. Black mana was gushing out of Catalina's entire body. A shadow-like thing surrounded Catalina's body, and within that shadow, Catalina hugged herself. She released a painful cry, and then it turned into a joyful scream. Another horn appeared on top of the horn that was located above Catalina's right ear. It was her third one. Since she was directly contracted with the House of Mammon, it personally impacted her. She was now one step higher in following Yongho, no, her king. The shadows that enveloped her disappeared. Her entire body was covered in sweat, and she collapsed while panting. She was so exhausted that even panting was difficult for her, but her face was filled with joy. Yongho's and Catalina's transformation happened almost at the same time, and it ended almost at the same time too. Yongho took a deep breath. He closed his eyes and enjoyed his transformation. Thanks to the fourth horn, his mana and his physical abilities had become extremely strong. He also felt Catalina's transformation. Eligor and Skull were outside of Mammon's arena, so he couldn't feel them. But witnessing Catalina's change was more than enough. When Yongho opened his eyes after calming down, 2 boxes of light appeared before him. He was sure that it was the reward that he was promised right before starting the match. But before Yongho was able to pick one, a sudden change occurred. Beside the boxes of light, another box appeared. He was immediately going to ask Lucia, but Yongho closed his mouth. His senses were really sensitive, and he knew Gusyeon's intentions. Gusyeon, who was sitting in the center of the audience, landed right in front of Yongho. Gusyeon was physically big, and since he landed a few meters away from Yongho, the ground shook when he landed. Gusyeon looked at Yongho and stood up from the spot where he had landed. Yongho didn't avert his gaze. He was definitely strong, but it was different from when he had first encountered Gusyeon. The overpowering feeling was different. The emotions in his eyes had also changed as well. Gusyeon looked at Yongho without saying anything. And then a small smile appeared on his face. Congratulations. You beat the first level. It's been a while since a competitor has beaten the first level. It was definitely a friendly voice. However, Yongho kept his guard up because he knew Gusyeon was still testing him. That feeling was difficult to explain. Yongho felt that Gusyeon was holding something back. Since you beat the first level, you need to be rewarded for it. 2 boxes are usually offered, but I added another one just for you. Pick one out of the 3. You won't get a losing ticket, so don't be burdened about it. Basically, it meant that the quality of the rewards weren't equal. I would recommend thinking this one. Before Gusyeon finished his sentence, Yong-ho picked one of the boxes. It wasn't a hasty decision, greed was guiding him. Which one would be the most valuable to Yong-ho? Which one will help Yong-ho achieve his goal? Gusyeon didn't see any hesitation in Yong-ho's eyes, and he turned to the Red Lotus Demon's Fire. Amon didn't reply this time either, but Gusyeon understood greed. It was helping Yong-ho. It relied on Yong-ho's will, and based on that, it activated a part of its power, the young owner that Aemon had chosen. It's a surprising gift. Definitely a surprising gift. Gusyeon mumbled as he opened his arms. He was telling Yong-ho to quickly open it, and after Yong-ho extended out his left hand, he released his mana. The box of light broke down and dispersed. The item that was inside landed on Yong-ho's left-hand skeleton mage scroll. The other two boxes disappeared. Before they disappeared, Yong-ho briefly saw the items that were inside them. One contained gold and the other contained a dagger that had magic abilities. The scroll allows you to summon one skeleton mage. Use your mana and then rip it. The type of skeleton that will be summoned will be based on your luck. Gusyeon gave a simple explanation, and Yong-ho nodded. He understood why this scroll was more valuable than the dagger. He was already thinking about how he should use the skeleton mage. How about it? Want to start the second level? Gusyeon asked. Yong-ho felt greed stirring inside him once again. It was telling Yong-ho that they wanted to feel Mamona's mana once more, but Yong-ho restrained himself. He used too much of his mana. Thanks to the evolution, his mana capacity increased, and a small amount of mana was restored, but not completely. On top of that, the third horn that Catalina was unexpected, so she was pretty tired too. The arena's floor masters weren't easy opponents. Continuing like this would only have a negative effect, but Yong-ho looked ahead. Even though he made up his mind, he kept on hesitating because Kaiwan was stuck in his mind. Don't rush, young owner. You cannot rescue her with the power that you have now. Amon explained to Yong-ho quietly. Since it was happening inside his head, Gusyeon couldn't hear him. Kaiwan was looking at Yong-ho desperately. She wasn't asking him to rescue her. She was asking Yong-ho to tell her about her brother. She was saying that any news would be fine. Yong-ho closed his eyes and ignored her. Next time was what he told himself, and then he looked at Gusyeon. No, it'll come back later. Anytime Master Mammon and I will always welcome you to the arena. The man with the beast mask that led Yong-ho into the arena stood in front of him. After showing his respect to Gusyeon, he guided Yong-ho once more and walked past Gusyeon and headed towards Catalina. Gusyeon turned around and looked at Yong-ho's back. A frown appeared on his face, as if his mind was filled with different emotions. Too small, Yong-ho can't be compared to Mammon. He wasn't good enough to be compared to the great king that led his spirits up the skyscraper-like stairs. Despite that, Gusyeon couldn't help but acknowledge him. They're similar. It's very small. Very small, though. He just beat the first floor. He was nothing but a weak competitor right now. Amon smiled at Gusyeon's stubbornness. He looked at Gusyeon with his divided conscience. Amon also remembered the same thing as Gusyeon, the last moment of the strongest king in the demon world, the last road he had walked on, the image of him leading everyone. The red demon, Lance Aemon, fired up and then walked past. He looked at the present, not the past. He took another step forward. Just like old times, following behind the king. The wind blew. The red demon's fire rose up. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 79. After following the man with the beast mask out of the arena, Yong-ho headed straight towards Catalina. She was sitting in the front row, while the spirits that were watching were sitting several rows behind. They were looking at Yong-ho and talking amongst themselves, but it didn't seem like they were going to approach him. Yong-ho looked at them for a brief moment. Amongst them sat Kaiwan. Just by looking at her face and body language, it was obvious that she wanted to rush straight towards him, but was instead suppressing it. The spirits, however, weren't acting that way. They looked relaxed when looking at him, but also kind of cold. The arena's spirits. It couldn't apply to all of them, but a part of them were most likely previous owners of the House of Mammon, just like Kaiwan. They entered as competitors, but lost and now remained here at the arena. Yong-ho turned his attention away. It was difficult to avoid Kaiwan's gaze because she was desperately trying to get him to see her. Are you okay? I'm fine. Catalina barely managed to answer when Yong-ho asked. However, her body answered differently because her ears and tail weren't moving in the slightest, but her expression was bright. Yong-ho won, and further grew in power. Catalina gained another horn, so it was obvious that she was happy about that. Yong-ho softly patted her head when she tried to stand on her own and then displayed a warm smile. After transforming Eamon back into a bracelet, he turned around and spoke. Get on him, sorry, get on ill, carry you. You can hardly stand, let alone walk. Yong-ho turned his back to her, kneeled, and signaled her with his finger to get on. Catalina blinked her eyes a few times and then turned around. The arena's spirits were having fun watching as they looked down on Yong-ho and Catalina. Catalina had better hearing than Yong-ho, so she was able to hear their conversations. Catalina. Oh, yes. When Yong-ho called her, her ears turned red and she carefully stood up from her seat. She ignored their stares and comments and got onto Yong-ho's back. The only time she'd ever gotten on someone's back was when the previous guard had carried her when she was younger. It was really awkward, but she managed to wrap her arms around Yong-ho's neck. Good. After grabbing Catalina's thighs, Yong-ho stood up. It was a good thing that she couldn't see his face, because he had turned slightly red. This was his first time carrying a girl, and the things he felt through his back seemed extremely soft. What the heck are they doing? Chwiryong asked as he watched them from afar. Since Catalina's senses had been heightened, she had clearly heard him. She tightened her lips and buried her face into Yong-ho's back. Yong-ho looked straight at Chwiryong. He didn't look that intimidating since Catalina was on his back, but it didn't really matter. He spoke loudly. I'll be going now. I'll see you next time. Anytime. A satisfied smile appeared on Chwiryong's face after he answered out loud. He was extremely satisfied when Yong-ho said the words next time. Chwiryong probably wasn't as bad as many thought. He only acted that way because he was being loyal to his owner, Mammon. Even though he told Yong-ho that he couldn't acknowledge him yet, once Yong-ho completed the levels, Chwiryong would acknowledge him as his owner. When comparing that smile to the one he had first displayed, Chwiryong was definitely being friendly. Is he like Shang Fei from the records of the Three Kingdoms? It just popped into his head, but he thought it was a decent comparison. On top of that, he had a large frame. He was known to have superhuman strength, so his muscular strength was probably unlike the others. He was a red demon after all. I still dislike him though. Kaiwan was one of the greatest owners to have existed. Chwiryong didn't physically abuse her, but Yong-ho still didn't like the way he was treating her. Yong-ho turned around and, after ignoring Chwiryong, he briefly looked at the spirits and Kaiwan before leaving the arena. Even though it was just their eyes that met, it felt like he was able to hear her voice. Anything is fine, so please tell me. I'm sorry. He couldn't say it. Kaiwan desperately wanted to hear some news about her brother, but the only news he could give her was of his death. He couldn't do that to Kaiwan in her current state. Someday, Yong-ho didn't really have any interest in her brother. The only thing Yong-ho knew about him was that he had died while filled with despair and remorse. Yong-ho turned around as if he was ignoring her, and then started walking away. The man with the beast mask walked next to Yong-ho and guided him to the passageway that led them outside of the arena. The man then stopped walking when they approached the passageway. He then pointed to the passageway as if he was saying that his job was done, and then disappeared. Yong-ho pushed Catalina up and walked into the passageway. It was different from when Chwiryong was leading, because when Yong-ho was leaving, the lights that appeared on the ceiling started to disappear one by one until complete darkness filled the space. How long had he been walking? Yong-ho stopped. Now there was only one light that was shining down upon him. Before leaving the arena, Yong-ho had to ask a question. Amon, speak, my young master. Amon replied right away. The Red Lotus Demon's flame appeared in front of Yong-ho. Catalina gulped while staying on Yong-ho's back. Yong-ho then asked while looking at the flame, Mammon, how did the King of Greed die? The strongest demon king in the history of the demon world. He was placed in the top 3 out of the 7 deadly sins, and also had 4 superhuman skills. He was one that called strong spirits, like Amon and Chwiryong, as his own. No one knew how he had really died. The only available information was that Mammon had suddenly passed away, and because of that, the house of Mammon had crumbled. How did Mammon die? He wasn't curious at first. Mammon existed over 1,000 years ago, so Yong-ho simply left it at that. But not now, he wanted to know. It felt like there was some sort of secret to this death. Amon didn't reply right away. Because he spent time with Mammon until his last moment, he remained quiet. It seemed like the flame that was moving with the wind was displaying Amon's feelings. Yong-ho waited. Catalina was afraid that she would make a sound, so she kept her mouth shut. "I'm afraid I cannot tell you yet, my young master," he said yet. Yong-ho decided to leave it at that. He asked another question. It was more of a confirmation than a question. "You said I can't rescue Kaiwan just yet, right?" "Yes, not yet. But someday, in the near future, I believe that it will be possible. I believe that." Even though he was just a flame, Yong-ho felt like he saw Amon smile. Catalina had the same feeling too. Amon must have felt satisfied with his answers, because the red demon's flame disappeared. Yong-ho watched the flame disappear with the wind and then breathed in deeply. Instead of looking back, he took a step forward and exited Mammon's arena. He wasn't sure how many additional steps he took in the total darkness. It was so dark that Catalina, who was able to see through the darkness, couldn't make out anything that was ahead of them. Yong-ho calmed himself down and walked forward. Moments later, he felt his disconnected senses connecting to the dungeon again. "Master, where did you go?" Lucia's voice rang loudly in his head. This finally meant that Yong-ho was completely out of the arena and was now in the first floor of the House of Mammon, the area that was under Lucia's control. Yong-ho also felt relieved when he heard her worried and relieved voice. He felt like he had finally returned home. "I'll tell you later. First, gather Eligor, Skull, and Ophelia to the library." Got it. Eligor and Skull experienced a huge, "Oh my, you gained another horn. And your mana has increased a lot as well." Catalina's mana has become extremely strong as well. What exactly happened in there? Instead of answering, he displayed a slightly awkward smile. And even though Lucia was mentally connected to him, she didn't push him anymore. "I understand. I'll relay your message to the three spirits." After he finished talking to Lucia, he walked out of the darkness and headed towards Kaiwan's break room. He felt Catalina quietly release a sigh of relief. "I think I know why Kaiwan kept the location of the arena a secret from the spirits. One was able to earn big rewards in the arena. The rewards, which included Mammon's mana, were extremely appealing. As someone that cleared the first level, Yong-ho was curious about the second level's reward. His opponent on the first floor was tough, so the floor master of the second level was probably stronger, but Yong-ho was far more interested in the reward compared to the floor master, or the fear of losing. Once one jumps in, they can't stop. If Ophelia's father participated, he probably would be kept on going until his last breath. According to Gusyeon, the punishment was a lot weaker for the owners, and Kaiwan experienced the punishment that was already set in the arena. In that case, what kind of punishments did the spirits experience? Losing one's life probably wasn't the worst punishment. "Catalina, never participate in the arena without my permission." Got it. Catalina gulped when she heard Yong-ho's request. From the way she reacted, she must have had a slight interest. "I understand. I'll follow your orders, sir." That was like Catalina. Yong-ho felt relieved when she answered honestly. After fixing Catalina's posture, he headed towards Kaiwan's break room. "You went to the arena." The library was supposed to be a quiet place, but it was filled with shock. The voice belonged to Ophelia. Yong-ho felt a bit flustered by Ophelia's unexpected reaction, but he quickly nodded his head. "I did. I cleared the first floor, and thanks to that, me, Catalina, and Eligor and Skull all changed." Yong-ho looked at Eligor and Skull while replying. Eligor and Skull had become stronger, just like Catalina. Eligor still had the same number of horns, but his mana became stronger, so his body now released a beast-like energy. Skull, who had become the Iron Skeleton Knight, had no way of releasing his mana, so Yong-ho instead felt an immense amount of mana within Skull's body. Ophelia couldn't control her excitement. It was refreshing to see this side of her because she was usually always calm and cold. Did she hear something from her father? That wasn't the only thing. Catalina, who had obtained a third horn, was sitting in front of Ophelia. Based on the amount of mana and the purity, Ophelia was still stronger, however. Excluding Aemon, Ophelia was the strongest out of all the living spirits in the House of Mammon. But if this continued, then someone else would likely end up taking that spot. Yongho was expecting such a thing to happen, and would be overjoyed if it did, since it would mean that the House of Mammon's spirits had become that much stronger. But it didn't mean that he wanted Ophelia to fall behind. She might not be as strong as her father, but she still wanted to become stronger. She was extremely competitive, however it was better than not being competitive at all. Please, please make me your personal spirit, sir. Her request was straightforward. Yongho smiled awkwardly. Of course, Yongho wanted to make her his personal spirit. But the reason why he didn't bring it up was because she would be bound to him. Spirits that belong to the dungeon also belong to the owner. If the dungeon died, then they would die as well. They were different from ordinary spirits, since ordinary spirits were able to terminate their contract at any time. Bound spirits would end up sharing the same fate as their owner. They devote their entire body and soul to their owner. That was the difference. That's why he couldn't make such an offer so easily. On the other hand, there was a reason why Ophelia didn't make the request before. It wasn't because of the constraints that Yongho had thought of, and it wasn't about having anxiety about having to give her life to him. The places were limited. The owners in the empty regions tended to have a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 personal spirits. Even the 6 strong kings that were controlling the demon world probably only had about 10. When thinking about the power of evolution and the House of Mammon's dungeon characteristics, the spirits were bound to grow at a fast rate. During these 2 months, Catalina and Eligor had become so much stronger. For Skull, Yongho purchased him from the dungeon shop, and he was nothing more than an ordinary skeleton worker. But Skull had grown a lot since then. That's why she didn't say it. But now she couldn't wait any longer. The moment she was suppressed by greed and Aemon, she had figured out that Yongho was the new king of greed, and that was when she had made her decision, that she would be the king of greed's spirit. Ophelia, please calm down. You're in front of the master, so please be respectful. When Eligor spoke calmly, Ophelia realized that she had been acting too excitedly, but instead she moaned and couldn't sit back down in her seat. Eligor looked back at Yongho for her. He spoke while showing his respect. Master, I would like to make the same request. Ophelia will definitely be a great help to the House of Mammon. Ophelia was touched by Eligor's unexpected support. She looked at him with a grateful expression. It felt like someone was cheering her on. Before answering, Yongho looked back at Skull and Catalina. Skull had a satisfied smile, and Catalina lightly nodded and agreed with Eligor's comment, which meant that everyone had agreed. Okay, if it's okay with you, Ophelia, it'll make you my personal spirit. But there's something else I need to tell you. Ophelia, who had lost her cool, quickly sat down and listened to Yongho. Eligor also paid attention to him. Yongho took a deep breath and organized his thoughts. The first topic was obvious. The owner from 3 generations ago, Kaiwan, the Queen of Distortion, is alive. As soon as he finished talking, both Eligor and Ophelia stood up from their seats. Chapter 80. Shez alive. Did you see her at the arena? They both stood up at the same time, but the emotions in their voices were different. Ophelia sounded shocked, but affectionate. It was quite different from Eligor's shocked reaction. Ophelia couldn't control her feelings. This type of excitement that she felt was different from the other ones she had expressed before. She sat down and mumbled to herself, oh my gosh, she's... Ophelia has never met Kaiwan before, but she was the daughter of Endelion, the one that admired Kaiwan. She heard a lot of stories from her father and, naturally, she started admiring Kaiwan as well. Ophelia recalled her father's face. He left because Kaiwan's brother, was weak, but he couldn't forget about the House of Mammon. She remembered him saying that the House of Mammon was going to rise up again after watching it fall. What would she say if she met Kaiwan? That her father abandoned her brother, that he left the House of Mammon because it wasn't up to his standard. She wasn't scared of Kaiwan's anger. She was scared of facing her sadness. Kaiwan would probably understand. If she was the Kaiwan that Ophelia knew, she would say that she knew he was going to leave. Kaiwan wrote a letter in case she disappeared, and in that letter, she mentioned that if Endelion left, she would respect his decision. But But still, Ophelia was extremely worried. She came up with an excuse. Endeleon was extremely heartbroken when Kaiwan disappeared, so he wandered around in the empty wilderness for a long time. When he returned with the young Ophelia, the House of Mammon had already fallen. And if he didn't leave, then the dungeon monsters wouldn't have taken the armory and the gold mine. Even though Cayenne was a weak owner, the House of Mammon still wouldn't have fallen that much. The excuse no longer sounded like an excuse. Yong-ho couldn't read all of Ophelia's feelings, but he had a feeling whenever she greeted him, she mentioned her father's name. She respected and loved him that much. So it was only natural that she would be shaken up after hearing that Kaiwan was alive. The arena rewards the competitor when they clear the floor, but there's a punishment if they lose. The punishment can get worse depending on the floor, but I think Kaiwan became part of the arena as punishment for losing. Ophelia used Yong-ho's voice as a guide, and after managing to calm down, she bit her lips. Yong-ho continued talking. It's not just Kaiwan, one can confirm it, but I think there's more. I think out of all the House of Mammon's owners, most of the ones that disappeared may be in the arena. Eligor kept on gulping. He recalled the House of Mammon's family tree. Kaiwan wasn't the only owner that had suddenly disappeared. If what Yong-ho said about the owners was true then, and if there were spirits at the arena that were strong enough to take down those owners, then Gusion, the manager of the arena, said this: if I clear every floor of the arena, then I'll be able to control all the spirits that are serving in the arena. Yong-ho spoke. Eligor and Ophelia, who were still shocked by the news, had huge reactions. Gusion, the one with superhuman strength, Ophelia said his name as if she was sighing. Eligor yelled as he clenched his fist. One of Mammon's 12 spirits. The strongest one, out of all the red demons, has known to be the strongest one in history. That was Gusion. He was so strong that he was known as the strongest red demon in history. I apologize for my immature behavior, but it's hard to not react to that news. If you were able to complete the arena, and if you're able to control all the spirits that are in the arena hell, even be able to go against the 6 kings that are controlling the demon world, Ophelia finished Eligor's sentence. It wasn't an exaggeration. Having Gusion under his control would be a huge success. And if the previous owners and the spirits that defeated them were under his control, then just imagining it made him excited. It made him shudder. However, Catalina didn't seem excited at all during the conversation. Her ears actually looked weak. It was easy to tell that she was worried. That sight calmed Eligor down. He had forgotten about the dangers it could cause because he was so focused on the big prize. Kaiwan and the other owners were in the arena because they had failed. The same thing could happen to Yong-ho as well. The excitement that Eligor felt disappeared. He sat back down, and when he slightly moved his mouth, Yong-ho waited for him to speak. Moments later, Eligor managed to talk. Are you planning on going back to the arena like Kaiwan? That's right, Yong-ho answered calmly. Yong-ho had already thought about all the things that both Ophelia and Eligor were thinking about. Of course, he wasn't going to go without a plan. But that didn't mean he was going to back out. He wanted to get stronger through the arena. He wanted to rescue Kaiwan. I understand Eligor the butler will follow you, sir. Eligor spoke seriously and Yong-ho displayed a warm smile. The spirits were really worried about him, so Yong-ho brought up another topic. Those are the 2 announcements that I had for you guys. Next is something a bit different. Yong-ho stopped talking for a moment and turned his head. Everyone else followed Yong-ho and looked in the same direction. Skull. Skull tilted its head. Yong-ho took out a scroll. As he created the Skull Army, Yong-ho naturally inspected different types of skeletons. Of course, each skeleton had different personalities. The potential evolution and the advancement routes were proof of that. But as a race, they shared the same characteristics. Skeletons were undead monsters that were made out of bones. Skeleton workers were the lowest rank, and Death Knight, and Elder Lich were the highest rank, but they all belonged to the skeleton race. Bone dragons were technically part of this race too. Lower rank skeletons rarely had a conscious. Skull was a rare case, because it had an ego despite starting out as a mere skeleton worker. Skeleton soldier was right above the skeleton warrior, and their ego was about the same as a golem. Among the skeletons that were in the Skull Army, there was one that barely had an ego, despite being a skeleton warrior. Yong-ho was standing in the corner of the library, and he ripped the skeleton mage scroll that he earned from the arena, even though he didn't use his mana. These scrolls still activated the magic white and blue lights appeared. The two colors started spinning in the air like a distortion, and as it spun faster, it released another strong light. A skeleton stood where the light was. Like the other skeletons, it looked like a human skeleton mage. Despite being a red demon, Ophelia was known to be the strongest mage in the House of Mammon, and she noticed how special the skeleton mage was. Yong-ho nodded his head. The scroll lost the remaining mana and displayed letters of light in the air. It wasn't like the message that Lucia displayed. They were letters used in the demon world. Skeleton mage, thunder, magic ability, enchant magic, thunder, lightning arrow. Just like the other skeletons, the mage probably didn't have an ego because it just stood there. Ophelia spoke. A skeleton mage is a spirit that's only created through a special order. It's impossible for them to learn new magic, but they're very skilled in the magic they already know. Since they don't really have an ego, they require detailed instructions. But with enchant magic and lightning arrow, I believe it'll increase our fighting power. Enchant magic enveloped a weapon with thunder, and lightning arrow was an arrow that released magic shaped like lightning. But Yong-ho wasn't going to be satisfied with just that. If he were to only use the mage for its magical powers, then greed wouldn't have reacted to that scroll. Yong-ho activated the power of evolution. He looked at Skull and noticed that after it became an Iron Skeleton Knight, the mid-rank training ground didn't really help in increasing his development rate. A light appeared. The light connected Skull to the skeleton mage. The words that Yong-ho was expecting were showing up in the box of light. Skeleton Magic Knight. A unison between the skeletons. On top of that, the skeleton mage had allow ego. Skull had a strong ego even when it was a skeleton worker, so there's no way that the skeleton mage would consume Skull. He did think about evolving the skeleton mage, but decided that this was the best route. For warrior spirits, increasing their physical strength was enough. But for magic spirits, it was important that they learned new spells. There was no guarantee that the mage would learn a new spell if Yong-ho evolved it. And if the skeleton mage's ego became stronger after the evolution, then things could turn out differently than what Yong-ho had imagined. This unison was an investment for the future and also a test. And since he didn't have plans to create a high-rank training ground anytime soon, he had saved the development trait for just this moment. And it was time ready. Yong-ho asked Skull. Since this was Skull's third time, Skull answered without any hesitation. Skull. This was the first time Ophelia was seeing a unison, so she didn't know what Yong-ho was going to do. Catalina and Eligor smiled and took a few steps back. Master Eligor. Eligor grabbed the confused Ophelia and pulled her back. He made sure that she stepped back far enough so that Yong-ho had enough space. Yong-ho raised his hands. He placed his hands on Skull and the skeleton mage's shoulders and drew out the dungeon's mana through Lucia. He poured a large amount of mana into both spirits. Unity evolution. A large green light appeared, and when that light disappeared, a skeleton knight enveloped in blue light was standing before them. Ophelia's eyes widened when she felt the skeleton mage's mana from Skull. She didn't say anything and just looked at Yong-ho, Eligor, and Skull. Excluding the mana that was needed to manage the dungeon, Yong-ho used nearly all of it. He took his hands off of Skull and carefully called his name, Skull, Skull. Skull answered energetically, then grabbed the hammer and raised it up high and casted a spell. Enchant magic. A blue thunder enveloped the hammer. The skeleton mage's mana was added on top of the mana that Skull already had, and Skull understood how to control the new power. Skull swung his hammer that was enveloped in thunder and then pointed it towards an empty part of the library. Thunder was released from the hammer. It was the lightning arrow. Oh. When Yong-ho exclaimed, Skull swung the hammer in the air again. Skull was going to show this during the Skull Armist training. Every time Skull swung the hammer, the sound of thunder filled the air. Because there was a spark, it sounded like Asmul Thunderbolt. Yong-ho was extremely satisfied. He whispered to Catalina, who was standing next to him. I'll give the nightmare to Skull. You're okay with that, right? Catalina, who was competing against Skull over ownership of the horse-shaped spirit, nodded. Skull was the leader of the skeleton army, and on top of that, Skull was now a mage that had the ability to cast spells, so giving the nightmare to Skull seemed like the best choice. When Catalina happily approved, Yong-ho looked at Skull happily. The final goal he had in mind for Skull's changes Death Knight number, a being that mixed the Death Knight's power and the Lick's mana. The first undead magic knight. Just imagining it made him proud. That night, Ophelia left the House of Mammon like she had planned and returned to the Free City. She would be returning a few days later. They decided to register her the next time she returned. After Yong-ho finished eating with the spirits, he returned to his bedroom and took out Kaiwan's journal. He wanted to check the information about the arena. But after turning a few pages, Yong-ho's hand stopped. Instead of looking through the journal, he took out a different book. Kaien's recalled Kaien's journal. He recalled the face Kaiwan made when she asked about her brother Yong-ho, opened Kaien's journal. He slowly read the information written there,